Kongversation.
The show is starting! Apparently my torture is to listen to every episode of The Kongversation back to back for all eternity! Oh, why was I such an unrepentant sinner?
Hello and welcome to The Kongversation. I'm Hyle Russell.
Oh, I don't think you've ever done it this way. I'm Josh Wallen.
Make yourself at home, Josh. Put your feet up on the coffee table. Take your pants off. Whatever. Your family.
Man, Hyle, it is an honor to be here. On another great episode of the Kongversation, the podcast by Clef's WigglyToughPokemonBonanza.com. We've got a lot to get into this week. We're going to be talking about Dexit. Now, Wigglytuff has been removed from the Pokedex, and that's infuriating.
I could talk about how I like to level my Pokemon up in the grass outside of Pallet Town.
Have you made it off of Route 1 yet?
So, I mean, in my original cartridge, yes. But when I was playing it on the eShop version on the 3DS, I didn't get that far, no. Sad to say. Life got in the way there.
Pokemon is quite a commitment.
Yeah, no, I look, for those who don't know, the way I like to play Pokemon is I like to train my starter to level 100 before I even progress anywhere else in the game. I'm just like, okay, I got a Squirtle. Cool. Well, time to get a level 100 Blastoise. And then I just walk around the grass outside of Pallet Town, beating up on poor, low-ranked, rats and pigeons for 400 hours, you know, and then I'm good to go. And then I catch them, and then I level them up, and I have a sickness when I play Pokemon, which is probably why I pretty much just called it early on in the franchise. Aside from like Pokemon Go, I haven't really dipped my toes in the waters of Pokemon since I think the Game Boy Advance generation. So,
well, then what are your thoughts on, hypothetically, I guess, then, only being able to meticulously raise 400 Pokemon to level 100 on Route 1 rather than having about 900?
I have whatever the Pokemon equivalent of a dog is in this fight. I really don't.
The Emperor.
Think okay, thank you. I think that, you know, I see people's frustrations, but also just chill out. I think the mantra of just chilling out took me a while to obtain, to practice, because as this game that we're about to talk about showed, there were only ever extremes, one way or another, with my attitudes towards it. And I think I'm walking the path right down the middle now, and we'll see how that takes me. But yeah, I'm not about like pulling out my hair or setting myself on fire over these things anymore. It's just not worth it. And it's just why would I make my fandom of something so corrosive to myself that I just don't enjoy it? Yeah, like, even if I have issues.
Absolutely, but, and I think you're right. The thing is, though, that perspective, that ability to say, like, okay, this might not be ideal. This might not be exactly what I wanted it to be, but it probably is what some other people wanted, and it'll still be fun, and it's not the end of the world. That I mean, it's video games, right?
Yeah.
But
yeah, well, and the thing is, like, if it was something like it came out that Game Freak was having, you know, these just terrible working conditions, like a lot of AAA studios where they're just grinding their employees into the dust, then yeah, maybe then I would have an issue. But until then, it's a video game, and yeah, you didn't get what you wanted, and the marketing was a little less than ideal. Hey, I've lived through all of that. You know, you can point towards any number of games. Hey, it wasn't what they initially promised us. Well, that was nuts and bolts. You know, it's just,
man,
I've
Hyle,
been
you
doing
are a
this.
professional. Like, you told me to make myself at home.
Yeah.
And so I threw you a curveball by deep cutting April Fool's Day 2001 at you, and you have just effortlessly steered it back toward the subject matter at hand, the Donkey Kong universe. Well done, sir.
To be fair, I could do that with anything. If I was ever called to a congressional hearing, I'm sure I could be talking about Lanky Kong in 5 minutes flat.
I would be surprised if it even took you that long, honestly.
I mean, yeah. Look. I do this for a living. It's essentially just second nature at this point, to the detriment of everything else in my life. But no matter. Yeah, this is our Donkey Kong 64 episode, but I did want to address something at the top of the show. So if you listen to the last episode, you'll know that we had a challenger when it came to our challenge of doing a commentary on our commentary on ukulele commentaries that Playtonic did back, like earlier this year. Well, that concluded earlier this year. And so Mitchell Wolf and I did a 2-part episode where we basically just did commentaries on their commentaries. And then at the end of those, I said, whoever can do a roughly 6-hour commentary on our commentaries will then get to pick an episode of the Kongversation for us to record. They get to pick the topic, and we'll do it. I said this season, but then just Andre, beloved member of our community, actually did it. And admittedly, I've not listened to the entire thing yet. I've skipped around, but it is legitimate. He pulled it off. He did a 6-hour, 37-minute, and 35-second commentary on our commentary of Playtonic's commentaries. So he's requested for us to do a character witness episode for the Banjo-Tooie Witchy World boss, Mr. Patch. So we've got to do it because he did it. He pulled it off. So we will do that. Not this season, unfortunately, but we will do that at some point early in season 8. And I feel like that would be a good way to kick off Banjo-Tooie's 20th anniversary year. So congratulations, Just Andre, on... God, I can't believe you sat there for 6 hours and 37 minutes. For the record, I've never done an episode of The Kongversation that's gone past, like... I don't think I've done one that's hit 5 hours yet in total.
Yeah. Bravo to Just Andre, absolutely. That takes a lot of dedication and a lot of effort. I mean, you think about like 6.5 hours, that's like half the length of a modern WrestleMania. That's really impressive.
Well, I was wondering how long it would take to bring up wrestling on this podcast, but I'm a little let down that it was a WWE reference and not an AEW reference, since you actually attended Dynamite last night.
Well, no, I attended. What I attended was the first episode of Dynamite back at the beginning of October.
Oh! You just had to watch Dynamite.
I just had to watch last night's episode.
Yeah. No, I understand. That's fine. So anyway, Andre, I hope you celebrate with a little bit of the bubbly, and we will announce that on social media that you've done it, and we will get to your episode early in season 8 for Banjo-Tooie's 20th anniversary year at that. So, of course, It's Donkey Kong 64's 20th anniversary right now. And while the Kongversation has already done a 2-part spotlight episode on it a couple seasons ago when it was added to the Wii U eShop, those episodes were pretty negative. They were hypercritical and just not very joyous. It really slagged on the game. And, I'm all about giving criticism where criticism is due. And Donkey Kong 64, to be fair, is a game deserving of criticism. But, I've kind of changed and evolved a little bit over the last couple of years. And I want to, I think, celebrate the game a little bit for what it's worth. I want to take this opportunity for its 20th anniversary to say, hey, this is actually what I really like about Donkey Kong 64. And, even if Nintendo hasn't bothered to acknowledge Donkey Kong on any of its anniversaries, because it was also Donkey Kong Country's 25th anniversary. And none of the Nintendo social media accounts bothered to mention that today, which, I think irritated a lot of Donkey Kong fans. Because we got like World Donkey Kong Day trending. Rare and Playtonic both tweeted about it. It's so infrequent for Rare to acknowledge those days on social media anymore, but they had several tweets on Donkey Kong Country today. So, like, that's a big deal. And
I was hoping at the very least that, like, the game might be added to, like, the Super Nintendo Online section of the Switch.
I have no expectations for any of that
Neither
stuff.
Neither did I, really. I was just hoping.
Yeah. For when it comes to a Donkey Kong anniversary, I have no expectations from Nintendo, unless it's, like, maybe the arcade original, but even then, like, they said, oh, today's the 15th anniversary of the Nintendo DS. And I think maybe their European account said, today's the 10th anniversary of New Super Mario Bros. Wii.
Yeah,
and
I saw that.
It's just like, well, okay, yeah. To be fair, like, a lot of games have come out this week in November over the years, generally because of where American Thanksgiving falls. It sometimes falls on Thursdays of this week, not this year, but, that means Black Friday, the holiday shopping season, begins the day after, so they generally time their big releases right around this time. So yeah, a lot of things get an anniversary, but, it's Donkey Kong Country's 25th anniversary, and you're talking about, like, the 15th anniversary of the Nintendo DS, and, I'm not gonna get angry about it, because whatever. It doesn't really matter one way or another whether Nintendo acknowledges it, but it's just funny to me that this studio that's part of Xbox Studios was acknowledging it. Playtonic, obviously, Daly runs the account, so of course she's going to acknowledge it, but it's just, like, come on, Nintendo.
Yeah, I am one of those weirdos who actually, I really, really liked New Super Mario Bros. Wii. But to acknowledge that and not Donkey Kong Country is it's kind of weird, actually.
Yeah.
Do you happen to know, has Nintendo ever done anything in particular to, like, celebrate or acknowledge the anniversary of, I guess, like, any Donkey Kong Country game?
I don't think so, but granted, I wasn't on Twitter until around spring of 2017, so they might have done something for the 20th, but I don't really recall them ever going out of their way to say, hey, Donkey Kong Country. And I think the reason why they haven't is because it's not available on the Switch right now, and they're like, well, why bring up a game that people can't actively buy from us? Which is, I think is pretty lame anyway, because it's not like Rare was gonna, make any money off of talking about it. Like, it's part of your history. You own the IP. You own the game.
Yeah, and plus, I feel like the 25th anniversary of the game is more about, even if maybe this particular game isn't something you're selling right now, like, it's more about, like, the legacy of the entire series.
Yeah. It is the introduction of the modern Donkey Kong. But yeah, I feel like whoever runs the Nintendo social accounts, and they don't advertise that, but, like, they generally, at least, like, of Nintendo of America, they are not, they seem to be more fans of other stuff. And, I don't know what their guidelines are, because these big companies, they have all sorts of really, really bizarre, like, guidelines for what you can and cannot do on social media. So much so that it's strangling. And so there might have been numerous reasons, including, well, you can't mention anything that's not actively being sold by us. And I don't know where New Super Mario Bros. Wii would be being sold. So
yeah, that's a really
you got
good
me, but that's just a theory. I don't know. I could be wrong. And, the SNES Classic, the mini, I'm sure you could snag one of those.
I suppose more than, like, I might theorize that more than anything else, and this is something that we have talked about individually and together, like, kind of ad nauseum. It's probably just sort of that Donkey Kong Country is undoubtedly on that level of, like, a legendary Nintendo franchise, but only for people of like a very specific age.
Yeah, maybe, but also it's been 25 years, and
that too,
like.
Yeah.
we, like, the people who were children when they played it are in their 30s now. So it's not like we're the lost
statistically,
generation.
there's not a lot of 30-year-olds on Twitter.
Yeah, I mean, it's not, but I guess, but it's also like they're always catering to NES nostalgia. So we are the age where we're taking over. So I don't know. It is what it is, but I'm not going to get upset about it because, again, the community really came out and really celebrated both Donkey Kong Country, and I'm sure we're recording this Thursday night, November 21st. So I'm sure tomorrow on November 22nd, which incidentally is my birthday, we will be getting a lot of Donkey Kong 64, whatever. We'll be getting a lot of remembrances and, stuff for Donkey Kong 64. And that's what this episode is. Like, I eschewed the whole notion of doing anything for Donkey Kong Country for the Kongversation, even for the 25th, because I thought, I have to draw the line somewhere with anniversaries. I can't just do an episode about something every 5 years because that's the way it's going to be from now on. Oh, it's the 30th anniversary of Donkey Kong Country. Got to talk about it. I was like, Donkey Kong, we generally recognize the 20th anniversary as a big deal on DK Vine. So Donkey Kong 64, it's your time in the spotlight, but happy birthday to DKC nonetheless. One quick note though, as it relates to the Kongversation, as it relates to Nintendo's sometimes seeming indifference to the franchise and the brand, if you'll remember earlier this season, our own David Thomas Lynch predicted a new Donkey Kong game would be released on November 22nd, 2019. He was wrong. Now, granted, this is November 21st, so if I wake up in the morning and they like shadow drop like a whole new Donkey Kong game, well, I'll eat some
Barrel
crow.
Maze 2.
Yeah, I'll eat some crow up in the Gangplank Galleon here, but if it doesn't, as I predict, then I'm sorry, David, but you do not get to be on the Shintaro Furukawa Mario Golf Game Boy Color episode. Well, that's not happening either. So, just disappointment abounds this November, doesn't it? All right.
Absolutely it does, but admittedly, there's not as much disappointment going around this November as there was back in 1999.
Well, there is a lot of self-delusion going on back in 1999, if I remember it right. There was a lot of... Well, okay, so let me explain. Now, because this is going to be a mostly positive episode about DK64, but to get to the positivity, we have to kind of confront head-on people's issues with it. So let me tell you the story. And I know I've related this before on this podcast, so this will be just a brief primer. My anticipation towards Donkey Kong 64, to really understand why I have the relationship I have with this game. My hype for DK64 was unlike anything I had experienced until that point in my then young life. Oh, I'm so old. Because, as soon as Donkey Kong Country came out, and I was like, this is the game I've been waiting for. Everything about this game speaks to me, speaks to who I am, or speaks to who the person I'm going to be. As soon as Donkey Kong Country came out, and then we got the pattern of sequels that quickly established itself. Like, it would be followed by Donkey Kong Land on the Game Boy, which would be followed by Donkey Kong Country 2 on the Super Nintendo, and so on. As soon as that, we also got the Nintendo Ultra 64 announced. Like, the hype for that, the Ultra 64, was like parallel, like the bird, right above Donkey Kong Country Mania. So not only did you have this massive franchise from Nintendo and Rare, but you also had the promise of this next console that would be, like so much better than the Super Nintendo, because that's only 16-bit. This is 64-bit. And have you seen that controller? What?
Yeah, it is hard to put into context nowadays. Like, if you grew up with, like, analog control sticks and 3D games just being the way that things were, like, I don't really even know how to draw a comparison between what it was like to, be able to move a character in circles for the first time. The only thing that's ever come close to, like, giving me that feeling again is VR. And even that's, like, very, very, it's very tech demo-y right now. They haven't really found their killer app yet. But, like, just what, like, and not only that, what you were saying about how hyped up the Nintendo Ultra 64, as it was known at the time, was, yeah, just, like, every single magazine that you looked at, every single, like, E3, or, the first E3, 2 E3s would have happened in the lead up to the N64. Just, like, the amount of hype surrounding that particular machine and, like, the next generation of gaming in particular, or in general, was just off the freaking charts and, like, nothing else I've ever seen since then.
Yeah.
Because of, what a leap forward it was going to be.
And it really was. And I know we at DK Vine have kind of sold Super Mario 64 short over the years. Speaking of tech demos, we've referred to it as such. Demo. Yeah, which is totally not fair. That was, just biased, like, fanboy pissing right there. But
you were 16. You do not have to justify yourself anymore.
Don't say how old I was, because then people be able to figure out how old I turn tomorrow, and that's terrifying to me. I'm 29, okay, Josh.
Sorry.
I'm 29.
Feel free to edit that out. I'm sorry. Yeah, Hyle is younger than me, actually.
Yeah. Actually, I'm turning 16 tomorrow. Don't ask me how I pulled it. I was -4 when this Yeah, it Super Mario 64, I remember the first time I actually saw it in motion, and it was at Toys R Us. It was on the kiosk they had, and it was like I was stepping out of my body into this completely different realm. It just felt like this, like, nothing would ever be the same again. And it wasn't really. I mean, that was such a leap forward. And you can talk all you want about, well, the Nintendo 64 didn't have third-party support. The PlayStation was so much more influential. Yes, all of that is true. It didn't matter. Because when you're that age, and when you're a Nintendo kid, like, the Nintendo 64 was just it. Like, that was... Yeah. I couldn't really fathom anything beyond the Nintendo 64. Like, this was going to be the console for however many years I lived. Because, hey, look, with the promise of the expansion pack and the 64DD, you would never need to get another console again. Well, but I digress.
Unless you want to play Luigi's Mansion, Hyle.
Well, hype aside, having that right alongside Donkey Kong Country Mania, you knew there was going to be a Donkey Kong Country game for this upcoming console. And especially because Donkey Kong Country's sister game, Killer Instinct, was advertised as a Nintendo Ultra 64 title, which ultimately didn't come to be. They released a port of Killer Instinct 2 as a semi-launch title for it, but it was still ingrained in, like, Rare was listed as one of the key developers for the NU64. Mm-hmm. And so this was just in the culture at the time. If you were a Donkey Kong Country fan and you kept up on the gaming news, if you subscribed to Nintendo Power, if you thumbed through Game Pros and EGMs on the newsstand rack, or, this is my American perspective talking, in the UK, there would have been different publications. In Australia, there would have been different publications, and so on. But it really was, like, written in the stars. We were going to get a Donkey Kong Country game for the Nintendo 64. And I remember when I learned about Donkey Kong Country 2, I, like, mapped out my head. I was like, all right, well, they're going to do a sequel to Donkey Kong Land after that. And then they got to do Donkey Kong Country 3. Like, I wasn't even thinking in trilogies at the time, but I knew there had to be a Donkey Kong Country 3. And then there had to be a Donkey Kong Land 3. I think I was viewing the Super Mario Brothers series probably subconsciously as, like, the way to do it.
Like, and games just come in trilogies of 3, yeah.
Yeah, and then you jump forward to the next generation and we would get Donkey Kong World or whatever, so, like, that I had it all mapped out in my head. So, 1996 would see Donkey Kong Country 3, 1997 would bring Donkey Kong Land 3, and then later that year, obviously, we are getting Donkey Kong World. Obviously. So, and look, in my defense, also a lot of these gaming magazines that weren't Nintendo Power were reporting that it was in development or that there were plans to do it. And, I've said, I remember watching some sort of gaming magazine show that was like syndicated on Saturday mornings. And I've tried to track this down. I can't find it anywhere on YouTube. So if anybody knows something from 1996, I think, early 1996, it was an American syndicated gaming program, or maybe it was like a tech program, but it was the mid 90s and it might be lost to time, but they even reported like, yeah, Rare is doing this, and the timetable doesn't really add up, but, I'm sure like Rare knew, yeah, we're going to. So yeah, but like,
and I think it's important. Like this might sort of set up later for like a way that I can say it'll help me say some positive things about DK64 later.
Sure.
Like to mention sort of like, you said you were a Nintendo kid and to you the N64 seemed like it was gonna be it. And like I was really like more of a Sega kid. And to me, the Nintendo 64, the way it was talked about and the way it looked and the way that Mario 64 was, like, to me too, it seemed like it was going to be it. Because the Sega Saturn sure as hell wasn't going to be it. So,
Yeah. Well, and I think too, it was because the Saturn positioned itself like, the 32-bit consoles, and then the Nintendo 64, the marketing, as much as I hated losing the Ultra in the name, just focusing on the 64 somehow really did make that more significant than it actually probably was. Like, it's so much more powerful. And Super Mario 64 was a killer app to launch with. I mean, Jesus. I mean, like that. It's remarkable actually, like how much that game, like, convinced everyone like this is going to be a system, even if like developers didn't believe it.
And the thing about it is like seeing screenshots of it, you talked about your first time actually seeing it at a kiosk, seeing screenshots of it and even like reading impressions of how it was going to work. Like you couldn't really wrap your mind around like how this was going to function or what kind of a game this was going to be. Yeah.
And of course, so this is the era when I would religiously read Nintendo Power and like study everything. Of course, I also studied the instruction manuals of all my games. I'm that guy. So I, of course, would then fantasize. I would see these pictures of Super Mario 64 and then I would imagine, but what is Donkey Kong going to be? And so I was picturing the renders from Donkey Kong Country games, those scenic renders that Rare always did, and I was just picturing that. That would be it. that would be how it would look. ACM graphics, but without all of the compression, with the small ass sprites. Nah, we are getting full on 3D, like Pixar quality.
Because it was like the Ultra 64 was reported like in 94, 95. It said it's going to be like the supercomputers they use to make Jurassic Park. It's going to be incapable of rendering graphics on that level. So,
right.
Like, the sky really did seem like the limit there.
It did. And there was a lot of smoke and mirrors involved with the way they hyped that thing up. And, the fact that it was cartridge-based didn't mean anything to me as a kid, because, again, I didn't really understand the significance between a cartridge versus a CD. So, like, a cartridge, that's how games come. Like, what's
Sure.
a PlayStation? The PlayStation is nothing. What's it's just one of the pretenders, like the 3DO. Like, this is, like, none of my friends have this. It's fine.
Yeah, it was crazy to me, actually. Like, after all of this, like, basically ever since I'd started playing video games, like, the N64 was hyped up as this, like, mythical, magical machine that was going to totally dominate everything. It was just going to come out and completely change the world. And it did, to be fair, but all that hype made it really weird when I started picking up, like, gaming magazines outside of Nintendo Power.
Yes.
In like early 97. And they're talking about like how well Sony is doing. And I'm like, what? Sony?
Yeah.
Like, like you said, I thought of them on the same level as like the 3DO and the Jaguar and, you know.
Right. Because in the early 90s, there were all of these like also rans, and I'm not like dismissing them or anything because I know they have their fans. None of my friends had them. None of they weren't even in my world. They always just felt like these weird, expensive things for like eccentric millionaires. And it was like, it didn't matter because like Nintendo and Sega, that was it. Those were the two. And, you know, and then I was old enough to remember Atari, but that like, there couldn't be anything else. Like, what do you mean Sony, like the person who makes my VCR? Fuck them. What are they doing? Okay. That's cute. Yeah. We'll see how that works out.
Like Panasonic could come in with like the CDI, and like that's an example of like, okay, this electronics manufacturer is gonna come in and try to make a video game console. Okay.
Yeah. And yeah, that was kind of a sobering reality around 97 when I started picking up things like EGM, because I wanted to read rumors about Donkey Kong 64, and Nintendo Power wasn't telling me anything. Oh, the letters I sent to Nintendo Power. Why won't you admit this is development? Why? Like, I'm serious. I am dead serious. I wrote so many, like, I know you're hiding it. Like, I was like the ranting conspiracy theorist who writes his, like, local newspaper to talk about fluoride in the water supply.
So you were like taking it as a personal affront that they were not telling you specifically about it.
Yeah, just like, let us know it's in development. You don't need to show me anything yet. I just want the peace of mind to know they're working on it. And I would have fantasies. I swear, Josh, I would have fantasies about turning invisible and sneaking into Rare headquarters just to see it. And this is back when they were still, in the Manor House before they moved to Manor Park, which is when I actually got to go to Rare. Was not the same place as my childhood fantasies. So I didn't get any of the visceral thrill of, I imagine I was a ghost here once. But yeah, you know, I would like sit back and be like, somewhere right now, they're working on the Nintendo 64 Donkey Kong game. It's tangibly like existing right now, and I want to just like not even see it. I just want to know that it exists.
The peace of mind, yeah.
Yeah. And I think I calmed down a little bit when Diddy Kong Racing was announced. I was like, okay, this is fine. But look, I remember playing Mario Kart 64, and I remember taking Donkey Kong on Royal Raceway and driving around Peach's castle grounds and just imagining I was playing as Donkey Kong in Super Mario 64, so I could imagine I was playing Donkey Kong 64, or what would, like, just the bizarre, like, ways I would try to get my fix. So, all this is to say that this was my most anticipated game of all time, because we've talked about, when you're that young, how long a year actually is. How long, hell, a month is when you're that young. Now it just flies by in the blink of an eye, but when you're like 16, hell, when you're 13, 12, and then you don't get this game that you know is coming until you're 16, that is an eternity. Like, that is a lifetime right there. And so I had essentially 4 years, because I really started thinking about this when Donkey Kong Country 2 came out. So 4 years of fantasies, of hype, of dreaming, of like angry letters, of thumbing through all of these video game magazines that I didn't particularly enjoy because they were talking about the PlayStation. What the fuck is Duke Nukem? Shut up. But I would do it just to like glean any information I could about what this game would be. And I remember Josh, I don't know if you, like, how many of these magazines you read around, like, circa 1997, but there used to be these mail order, like, video game stores that would advertise in these. And, like, it's just a weird, shady way of doing business. But this is before the internet was, like, ubiquitous in everybody's homes. So, like, I get it. Like, maybe if you live in some rural area that doesn't have, would it have been a GameStop or, like, software, etc. Or
yeah, it'd be like software, etc. There were, like, Funko Land, I think, was
Funko Land, yeah.
But what you're talking about is those like big, gigantic list order forms that were in gaming magazines back then.
Yeah,
and,
but
go ahead.
But yeah, they would list games that hadn't even been released yet. Basically, a pre-order, but a speculative pre-order. So they would take your money and then, like, promise you that we'll still be in business when this game comes out. Like, okay. So I remember in 1997, there would be several listings, and I've tweeted and then Facebooked about this on the DK Vine account a couple times, but one in particular, they would list the Donkey Kong game for the Nintendo 64, but they would call it Donkey Kong Fantasy. Donkey Kong Fantasy would be the name. And in one of my angry letters to Nintendo, I ripped out this page and I highlighted it and I said, explain yourself. What is Donkey Kong Fantasy? Because I'm thinking, like, holy shit, is this going to be an RPG? Or is this going to, like, is the plot of this game going to be, like, Donkey Kong becomes a wizard? Like, what is Donkey Kong Fantasy? I think they just called it that.
I love how indignant your tone was toward them. Just like,
well,
like there was some part of you that might have been a little bit worried that that maybe once they announce it, maybe then it'll come out faster.
It wasn't even that I think I was just indignant that I felt like they were patronizing me, that they were just like, look, I don't know. You don't know who I am, but I'm, like, probably one of the biggest fans of this series. You gotta level with me here. And now you're talking about, like, all, like, 1997. Yeah, it was, like, Banjo-Kazooie had just been announced and Conqueror's Quest. And then I was really nervous. I was like, is Rare not doing this? Have they decided they don't want to do Donkey Kong anymore? Like, what is happening here? And of course, I made my peace with those two properties very quickly, but, it was, and then, like, 1998 rolled in and it was Pokemon Mania, and I felt like I was losing. I was losing my childhood because my favorite series didn't have its game for the Nintendo 64. Yeah, we had Diddy Kong Racing, and then that spun off Banjo and Conquer, but where was my Donkey Kong platforming game for the Nintendo 64? This game that I'd been fantasizing about since roughly 1995. They announced it New Year's Eve of 1998 going into 1999. And I'll never forget, like, it was just the Nintendo website. Didn't have to wait for Nintendo Power, Nintendo.com. And there it was, a screenshot of Diddy Kong in a minecart. I think it was Diddy Kong. Yeah, it was Diddy Kong in a minecart. And it was, like, super low res. Like, you could barely decipher any details. It looked like Clubbo from Donkey Kong Country 2 was in the other minecart. Not true, but that was just, like, the most mind-melting night of my life. Like, everybody remembers where they were New Year's Eve, 1999, like the dawn of the year 2000. Now, I remember where I was the year before that, when they announced Donkey Kong 64. That's my story. Also, they announced Mario Party that night, and Super Smash Brothers. And weirdly enough, like, Super Smash Brothers wasn't a big story up until that point. You would think this giant crossover fighting game that it was, like, already out in Japan would have, like, made some waves. But yeah, it was like, oh yeah, we're bringing it over here. It's a fighting game with, like, all the big Nintendo characters.
I think people just had trouble wrapping their heads around how a fighting game starring Nintendo characters was going to work back then.
And I think it was just one of those things where, in that era, we would hear all these stories about these like Nintendo games that exist in Japan only, and we would usually like write them off, either because they were just made up stories or because, well, we're never going to get that, so what should I care? Like, the world was a lot larger back then. The world has shrunk considerably in the last 20 years.
The other thing is just that, like, hype back then was a little bit more nebulous to measure, I guess, because the internet, like, was a lot more, like, decentralized. You know, there wasn't just, like, 1 or 2 or 3 places that you could go to see people, you know, freaking out about new game announcements. There were, like, just, like, message boards and fan sites and email lists and web rings. So
it was the Wild West. There was the, of course, the AOL. Like, even the internet, like, you had America Online's version of the internet, like, their hub. And then some people never even ventured into the actual internet. And, yeah, you didn't, like, you couldn't just see what was trending on Twitter. Like, now it'd be like, hashtag Donkey Kong 64, boom, trending right away on New Year's Day. That's not the case. That wasn't the case back then. So, yeah, it was just a weird.
Those at the same time were just exciting times because, like, without, I guess, news aggregation being, like, as, like, robust as it is now. Like, I don't specifically remember learning about DK64 for the first time, but I do remember just randomly going on, I think, like, Rare.com, or, you know, Rareware's website one day in late 97, and finding this couple of paragraph announcement about Diddy Kong Racing, which was going to be out in, like, 2 months or something. And yeah, I mean, that was just, like, an exciting time.
See, my experience with Diddy Kong Racing, I wasn't online at that point, so I found out through Nintendo Power, which was just crazy, because it was out of nowhere. But, yeah, so 1999, man, like, the entirety of 1999 then was just about this game. 1999 dawned with the announcement of Donkey Kong 64, and I was hoping that was going to be a working title, because I hated that title. It's like, nah, they've got to call it Donkey Kong World, or Donkey Kong Universe, or Donkey Kong... Like, we haven't even launched DK Vine yet, so while I had the concept of the Donkey Kong Universe in my head, I didn't have that branding yet. So, I was like, yeah, call it Donkey Kong Universe, or Donkey Kong Galaxy, or, you know... maybe don't want to go that big yet, because we've got to save that for the next console, you know, so just go.
Was Donkey Kong 64, like, how many games after that came out with that title scheme? Because, like, early on in the N64's life, like, everything was something 64. But, you know, I think, like, by 98 and definitely by 99, there weren't a lot of games following that scheme anymore.
No, it seemed archaic at that point, which is why it seemed like a working title that they never actually got around to fix. Like, so much about that game's development is kind of chuckle worthy. We'll be getting into it a little bit, but I feel like, yeah, they just didn't think about it, and they just ultimately went with, like, the placeholder title. Very bizarre, but yeah, 1999 though, yeah, it was all about that game, and I mean, it was the holy grail to me, as I've established, and, you know, got Mario Party earlier in the year, which turned my N64 controller into a broken claw, and also gave me a scar that's still on my hand today, thank you. And Super Smash Brothers came out, and that was a game where Donkey Kong could slap Link and Pikachu, but, you know, I would have never thought that the DKU would take such weird turns that it did. I mean, you know, Diddy Kong Racing, like, launched a whole expanded universe of spin-off characters, essentially. And back when I had made that plan in my head of it's going to be Donkey Kong Country, Donkey Kong Land, Donkey Kong Country 2, going up to the N64 game, I never would have imagined we would be getting a game about a bear and a bird and a squirrel. This is pre-alcoholism, of course. Or that we would have gotten a board game that the modern Donkey Kong would be in with Mario and friends, or a giant Nintendo crossover fighting game. Like, that stuff, like, was inconceivable. So with all of those surprising...
The crazy thing is, like, this whole period that we've been describing on the episode so far.
Yeah.
Like, I know you said earlier, like, 3 years, like a year is an incredible amount of time when you're that age. Like, to me, looking back, the time from Super Mario 64 coming out till DK64 coming out just seems like a wait of forever. And I mean, I'm with you there. Like, you were waiting for it, you were anticipating it, you knew it was coming eventually. But like, there came a point where it's like, man, this is like the N64 has been out forever now, and that's really what it seemed like.
It really did.
It's wild to put it in the lens that I have for time now, and like it only took 3 years,
But those 3 years are a more significant 3 years than like 3 years ago today. I don't know. The last 3 years have felt awfully long, but I won't get into that.
In some ways, yeah. But like 3 years ago, you and I did the DK wrap up episode of the Geek Critique. That doesn't seem like all that long ago.
Yeah. I mean, it is funny how time works. But yeah, 3 years, it was in like more than halfway through the N64's life, essentially. So, yeah, but despite all that time, despite the weird twists and turns that it took, I knew Donkey Kong 64 was my destiny. And I co-founded DK Vine on that promise that this was going to be ultimately the game that my entire gaming life had led up to that point. So I had to convince myself that it was the flawless masterpiece that I spent the last 4 years trusting it would be. Because when you're that young, or you lack self-assurance, you can't process disappointments of that magnitude. So you have to create an alternate reality to placate yourself. And that's what I did. And that's not saying I didn't actually enjoy playing the game, but I definitely overlooked any disappointments. I rationalized them right out of my head, and it was interesting. It was interesting to look back now with all the perspective I have and see like, wow, like, I really did overlook some things, but we'll get into like then how I feel like I overcorrected for that, especially coming back to DK Vine after my stint in Los Angeles and like having to come to terms with some of the more embarrassing stuff from the first 10 years of DK Vine. I feel like I may have sold this game a little bit short than maybe what it deserves. So anyway, I've been rambling for far too long, Josh. I want to hear about your own personal history with the game because, I associate you so much as the Sonic guy. But
Sure.
That's also why I wanted to have you on this episode, weirdly enough, because I feel like you and your relationship with Sonic the Hedgehog and your videos about it actually made me reassess my own relationship with this game after I slagged off on it on that Spotlight episode a couple years back. So anyway, I'll cede the floor to you for a bit while I nurse my tug-of-war scar, because whenever the weather gets cold, it starts flaring up a bit.
I am very, very thankful looking back that Mario Party was just a rental for me because like I did have a scar. I did have like, but it does not seem to have been permanent. So regarding DK, the thing with DK64 that's kind of fascinating is that this game is so irrevocably tied to my fandom of you and of DK Vine and sort of my discovery of the wider Donkey Kong fandom. So I did like about 4 years ago now, right around the same time as the DK64 Spotlight episode of the Conversation came out, actually. I did an episode of the Geek Critique on DK64, and it was about 10 minutes long. And nowadays, I tend to spend about that length of time just talking about the historical context of a game and like really doing a deep dive on my own personal history with it. And yeah. I wasn't really doing that to any particular level back then. So yeah, I think it would be fun to kind of dive into that.
Sure.
Now, of course, like, growing up, like, before the N64 came out, me and like all of my best friends who, like, like, there were a lot of kids in the neighborhood, and we would all, we all spent, like, the better part of a year beating Donkey Kong Country 2, which was just the most difficult game we had ever played, because I am, like 4 years younger than you are, I think. So I do
you're
have
12.
a little bit of a different perspective on this. Or 12 years older than you, yeah. But I guess the thing is, I always like had a great deal of love and affection and sort of fond memories of those times and of the Donkey Kong Country games. But at the same time, when the N64 came out, like, that was kind of it for a while. That, like, the N64 was I guess nowadays I constantly go back to my old favorites, and I'm always playing it, I'm always replaying them, and I'm always thinking about them. And back then, I guess I just didn't have the time to dedicate to that sort of thing, because I was basically just laser focused on whatever the big N64 game of the once every 6 months was, because that's about how often the N64 got, a really, really big landmark title. So while I was always looking forward to DK64, I was always, like, anticipating that it would get there eventually. But at the same time, I felt I got Banjo-Kazooie and absolutely loved it. Before that, I got Diddy Kong Racing, absolutely loved it. And I guess to a certain extent, like, the fact that Rare was coming out with other games, and that, like, Donkey Kong, or at least Diddy Kong, was still in the spotlight through Diddy Kong Racing, like, that kind of satiated me. So I don't really think, I guess that's probably why I don't have any particular memories of, like, I guess, following DK64 news or thinking about it that hard, or I guess it was just really hard. In a large part, it was because it was really difficult for me back then to sort of contextualize, this game that might be announced years from now is going to be really, really good. I don't think I had the perspective to really do that the way you did. Being a bit younger.
Sure.
But all of that changed the day that I came home from school and I had I had been delivered a VHS called Hot News 64.
Oh no.
Now, like, even then, how I would have been like 11 at the time. Even then, I knew that this was sort of a cheesy, like, up its own butt kind of video. It was kind of, it was kind of a, like, it sort of skirted the line between, are you self-aware of how lame you are? Or are you just playing all the way into it, I guess? Nonetheless, the Hot News 64, I guess we should explain what that is, was yet another Nintendo Power promotional VHS. And it sort of occupies the same place in my history as, like, the Donkey Kong Country VHS does in yours. Okay, yeah, I said in my history, not that it's that important to me, but, and I actually watched a little bit of it earlier today, and just, like, sort of comparing that to the DK60 or the DKC Exposed VHS, like, you can see just there was, like, this massive cultural difference in the 5 years between 1994 versus 1999.
Yes. So, okay, admittedly, I am going to put this video, Hot News 64, and it's Hot News with a Z, Josh, because this was 1999, and we had eschewed the letter S in 1999, very briefly. I believe, the Clinton administration, it was executive order by them, overturned by George W. Bush. But, Hot News 64. I'm going to put this up on our YouTube channel, DK Vine's YouTube channel at dkvine.com/pootube. And they dressed so obnoxiously in this. And I remember like comparing it to DKC Exposed with Josh Wolf and everything. And like that was like full on Seattle era grunge, you know, just like what people now think of as the 90s, you know, like, oh, what is some quick shorthand for the 90s? Bam, right there. There it is. But yeah, 5 years later in the late 90s, everything was a lot more clean cut a little bit. Everybody was dyeing their hair blonde, or at least guys were, you know, spiking it up a little bit, got the big sideburns. You've got, essentially like what NSYNC look like when you think about NSYNC. Yeah. You know,
early in the video, the host makes a reference to the cargo pants that you, the viewer, are inevitably wearing.
So, yeah, I mean, it's all I can think about is, and this is my own biases here, it's, yeah, I don't like the way this looks nearly as much. And I think it's also because being 16 versus being 11.
Yeah.
You feel like your childhood is slipping away, and you feel like the culture is changing around you, and you start to feel like you're starting to feel like an outsider a bit, or at least I was. And I was never like in the grunge scene when I was 11 years old, don't get me wrong, but that is what is comforting you because that is what you know. And that is what you associate as the imagery of your childhood. And when that starts to shift, when the culture moves away from what you like, you inevitably hate it. And it's something I think we all go through to some extent. And that I mean, DK Vine was basically a response to this in the first several years of our existence. Just us shouting angrily at the clouds, like, how dare you move on from the Play It Loud era? That was awesome. This is the way it's supposed to be. This is the neutral setting. This is like my equilibrium is totally out of whack. Things. Yeah. And
whereas for me, you know, when I was a teenager, for me that was more like, you know, trip pants and the whole like goth / emo aesthetic was like, oh, this is what we're doing now.
Yeah. And then, you know, like, you've also got the cultural backlash to what immediately was popular beforehand. And I've compared this to like things like whenever there's a new, like, James Bond, for example, everybody shits upon the last James Bond. Like, well, thank God that Joker's out of here. And then after like a decade, it's like, then we like reassess our culture. So Donkey Kong Country went through this, where everybody, all the big publications started shitting on Donkey Kong Country because it was super popular in the mid 90s, but now it's the early 2000s. So fuck you mid 90s. We've come to our senses and now we like this. And then 10 years after that, nostalgia kicks in. We're like, oh, we're sorry, Donkey Kong Country, come back. And there's various reasons for this, but it's interesting to, when you first live through it, it is the worst thing in the world because it feels like your childhood is being assaulted. Your childhood is under attack. Your very way of being, your existence is being altered. It's like in Back to the Future when, you know, Marty starts to fade away, because that's what it feels like. Like, my past is being mucked with here, and I am angry.
And it does take like some perspective, as we were talking about earlier in the episode, to sort of adjust to that and know that no, this is fine, this happens, this is okay. But it is very jarring, I think, when what you think of as the correct way for the world to be starts changing and you're aware of that.
Yeah. And look, change is ultimately good in our society, but I'm talking about like superficial things like dudes wearing flannel, you know, or like fisheye lens and just like extreme, like Mountain Dew, chug it, you know. It's so I view Hot News 64 as the death of my childhood. I view it as an affront to everything that makes DK Vine what it is, because DK Vine was basically a response to this shift, hey, remember 5 years ago when we all liked Donkey Kong Country? Can we get back to that? And we were angry young men running DK Vine. I have mellowed considerably.
To be fair, look, Hot News 64, like, we're just talking about the way that it looks. The whole tone of this VHS is just like, even to an 11-year-old,
that's what it is.
It was like
watery.
You're trying so hard to be relatable and cool and hip and with it.
Yeah. Yeah.
You're trying so hard to appeal to what you think is cool right now. And like, even as an 11-year-old, I could see right through it.
Now, to be fair, DKC Exposed was the exact same way, but I feel like with the way the culture was then, there was almost, they could get away with it a little bit more because it felt like very self-aware. And maybe this was exactly the same level of self-awareness, but the self-awareness doesn't play as well because everything that was trendy at the time sucked. See, I'm just letting my my biases show again, but it really was like everything was like poppy and there was a sheen to everything, and it just felt patronizing in a way that DKC Exposed didn't. And this was also a year after the John Lovitz narrated Banjo-Kazooie video, which was just John Lovitz riffing on Banjo-Kazooie for like 8 minutes, which was sublime. So to go from this to that, or to go from that to this, was horrible. Like, just because that was just pure game footage with John Lovitz narrating it. So this was no.
That is so fascinating. It's really interesting, like, to sort of make this comparison, because I guess the easiest way for me to sort of imagine what this must have been like from your perspective would have been like if, say, in 2004, 2005, they released like a Donkey Kong Jungle Beat VHS. I guess it'd be a DVD by that point.
It would be. It would
the
be
host
a DVD.
was made to look like the lead singer of My Chemical Romance.
No, Good Charlotte. Come on, man.
Sure.
Keep it in the family. Right. Which I don't think I would have had as much of a problem. Well, at the time I would have, but like me looking back in 2019, probably not as much of a problem with that. But this was just, it was cheesy and it felt like they were talking down to me. And I remember hating, like, watching this really excited and hating it. Just absolutely hating it. Even the footage of Donkey Kong 64 was just like, I was like, I could just see this on the internet. Because also at this point, to keep it into perspective, I had Rare's website. I had Lee Loveday talking directly to me. Not to me, but I mean, well, like in every scribe's letter column, essentially. But there's also a reason I stopped subscribing to Nintendo Power around this time, because it just wasn't necessary anymore. I was online and I had an authentic voice for the stuff that I loved, and this was inauthentic in every way. So I'm happy that it had the same meaning to you that Josh Wolf, Ken Lobb, and Michael Kelbaugh had to me. But
no, hang on. I didn't say it had the same meaning. I said it occupies the same place in my history.
Okay, all right,
like,
fair enough.
I guess what I'm saying is not that it's that memorable, not that I look back on it that fondly. More that it's just like, I watched it quite a few times. It made me, like, I was really, really excited for DK64 after watching it, and I felt like I knew a lot more about it. And also, like, in much the same way that stuff like, guess what? They get paid! You know, some of those ridiculously horrible pandering lines will be stuck in my brain for the rest of my life.
Yeah. They also plugged the Donkey Kong Country cartoon show, because they had the VHS around the same time, the Legend of the Crystal Coconut. And they plugged that right after Donkey Kong 64, which I viewed as a double slap in the face. I was just like, all right.
God, I bet you did.
Yeah. So, yeah, not my scene, Hot News 64. No thank you. Downvote. I'm going to downvote my own video when I put it up tomorrow. Just going to be, nope.
Hey, Hey, thumbs up, thumbs down, doesn't matter. What matters is engagement. At least that's the theory.
That is a theory. Yeah, so luckily, like, Hot News 64 was just kind of a blip in my own memory because, again, I not only did I have Rare's website, I had DK Vine, so I could just spout my own propaganda about the game, just completely unfounded. Like, the level of self-assurance I had in those early days of DK Vine is staggering, considering we had no idea what we were talking about.
But you also had no reason to doubt it, is the thing. Like, looking back now, I can totally understand why you would have thought the way that you did about it and why you said the things you did. Because, like, I guess it's one of those things, like, Rare and specifically, like, Donkey Kong Country and, like, Banjo-Kazooie and, you know, I know you guys were never, like, as big into, you know, GoldenEye or Killer Instinct or, you know, the more quote-unquote mature franchises that Rare was coming out with. But regardless, like, Rare had never let you down at all. Like, every single game that they came out with was instantly this, like, important masterpiece. Like, it would instantly guaranteed to become one of your favorite games you had ever played. So,
yeah, like, I know you'll disagree on this notion, but even something like Donkey Kong Country 3, to me, I love, and I still love. It was not as good as Donkey Kong Country 2, but in a lot of ways, it was, you know, so, and that's a game I haven't, like, really reassessed my opinion of.
Kiddy Kong
like
is
Donkey
one
Kong
thing,
64.
DKC 3 is fine.
I mean, I'll take fine. But, yeah, like, and that's a good point, and that's also because we weren't aware of really, like, the different teams at Rare. So,
very true,
even though I learned from the Rare website that, and if I studied the credits more closely, that the team that worked on Donkey Kong Country 3 was not the same team that worked on the first two Donkey Kong Countries. But, you know, you don't really think about, like, oh, well, Banjo-Kazooie, this is Greg Mails designed, and you got Steve Mails and Ed Bryan and Chris Sutherland and Grant Kirkhope's doing, like, you barely register that when you're that age and when you don't have access to the information that we have now. So, Donkey Kong 64, it was like, well, who's the team behind this? What's the story behind the development here? It's just that they have never let me down with Donkey Kong before. It's got that Rare logo. I'm sold. Let's go. Let's do this. This is going to be a masterpiece.
And that's a very, very, like, astute point. Like, it's good to look back on that because, like, yeah, like, to offer, again, my slightly younger perspective at the time, just, like, even though, like, Rare was just Rare, you know? And even Hot News 64, like, it points out, that's right, Rare, the same team that brought you Banjo-Kazooie, Acting Game of the Year in 1990, and, you know, they're, like, hyping up Rare. Like, you don't, like, even now, people don't always know, like, the details of, like, okay, well, this person directed a game. That's not always, like, the most common thing in gaming even now, but, you know, back then, like, I had absolutely no impression that anybody other than just this company called Rare was making these games. Yeah,
like, I didn't know how game development worked back then, and I still, you know, don't really know today. I mean, I know more, obviously, but, you know, I go in with bullshit lore and I make stupid memes on social media. So, like, that's the extent of my knowledge. But yeah, so, like, not knowing, like, anything about the history of the development behind the game, not knowing, like, who actually at Rare was doing it. And I'm not slagging off the team. Don't get me wrong. There are a lot of talented people behind Donkey Kong 64. And just because everything didn't really work out exactly the way I would have wanted doesn't mean I'm knocking them. It's just, you know, some things don't pan out exactly right. And there's a lot I love about Donkey Kong 64, which I really want to focus on. And I feel like we have to kind of just touch upon the negativity, though, a little bit. But
I do think that even just in the past 4 years since we did our respective episodes on it, a lot more has come out about this game's, like, development process. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think
stuff that was only hinted at in scribes back in the day. And yeah, we know a little bit more. I know, actually a bit from a few different sources, and I don't really feel like I can talk about all of the stuff I know, and I don't mean to be like a sneaky Pete, like a real, like, hoo, look at me squirreling away my secrets for the winter. No, it just, like,
Hyle, if you know something, you have to tell us. I'm very offended that you don't want to. Just say it. Just let it out. Just come on. We all know it.
Yeah. But, it does, I think, illuminate some of the stuff that went wrong in development and why the game turned out the way it did, why they made decisions that I've hated for 20 years. Well, not 20 years. Let's say like 18 and a half years. But
by 2001, you would pretty much come to terms with it.
Yeah. But it's like all the stuff I said they should have done, they actually attempted. So I was like, okay. Like, I guess me not being a developer, just armchair quarterbacking it, I feel a little bit bad now. But we should probably talk about, like, the good things about it, too. And I kind of want to lead with that, and then we'll address some common criticisms and kind of not, like, explain them away, but also try to make peace with them a little bit. I don't know. We'll see how this goes. This might just be us ragging on the game, but
I'll do my best to not just do that. I've prepared. I played it a little bit earlier today.
Did you play it a
Just to
little
sort of,
bit?
like, What's that?
Have you ever actually finished it?
No, like, to my great shame, I haven't. So, real quick, let me sort of, like, give you the Cliff's Notes version of, like, what happened when the game came out. When DK64 came out, like I always did back then, I went to Blockbuster, and, like, there'd be a hot new game, I'd go to Blockbuster, I'd rent it, as, like, sort of a prerequisite check, like, is this absolutely something I'm going to want for Christmas this year, right?
Right.
And so I rented DK64, and I played it, and, I quite enjoyed it. I definitely, like, immediately, even though this was before I'd found DK Vine, you guys had just started at the time. I didn't know anything about DK Vine, but I remember being aware even then that there had been this sort of immediate backlash to DK64. Like, that there were certain people in certain publications who were already taking issue with it. And, I remember playing it and just being like, well, this is really good. This is fine. I don't like this. This is an enjoyable game. And I think that they've done a great job with it. And that this is about what I was expecting it to be like. And yet I did not get DK64 for over a year after that. And I think the reason is it just didn't make, for one thing, it just didn't make all that much of an impression. It wasn't like, I guess, Banjo-Kazooie had been, where I rented it and it was like, oh my god, I have to get this as soon as possible, right?
Right.
DK64 did not make that impression. And the other thing is just that, like, I was so preoccupied between Pokemon and the Dreamcast at that time that I basically had no time or, like, I guess, Christmas budget for anything else. So I think that's why it's sort of like, it didn't totally fly under my radar, but I didn't really give it maybe the time or the attention that you might have that I might have been expected to, I guess, if you know how much I love Donkey Kong Country.
Yeah. When you say it didn't make an impression, I think that's a good point, because when you look at how Donkey Kong Country, like, was just this seismic thing for the Super Nintendo, graphics, music, there had never been anything like that on that console or in 16-bit gaming. You looked at it and you were like, oh my god. Donkey Kong 64 didn't feel like that. It felt like, here is another game. And especially coming after Banjo-Kazooie, it felt like this is another game that's very similar to this game that just came out last year. Even with the expansion pack, which we know was just to prevent the game from crashing, it didn't feel like it was this leap forward in any way. It was just a Donkey Kong game. It looked good for the Nintendo 64. It had some cool lighting effects, but it wasn't the same leap forward that Donkey Kong Country was. And that was the first time a Donkey Kong game didn't feel like that. Or a modern Donkey Kong game didn't feel like that. But even like the arcade Donkey Kong game, of course, was a leap forward. So it just felt like there wasn't anything revolutionary about it.
Well, and then here's the thing, though, and this is where it sort of ties into you and your experience with it, is that about a year later, on a whim, I was probably getting a little too old for it at this point, but I remembered when I was younger, I'd watched the DKC television show, like on God, what was it, like the Family Channel?
Family.
I think.
Fox.
Yeah.
No, it was Fox Family at that point because Fox bought the Family Channel, and then that was before ABC bought the Family Channel and became ABC Family, and then it became like Freeform or something. I don't know.
Well, in any case, we were at like not Blockbuster, but like local movie, like movie rental place, and they had that very DKC TV VHS that they had advertised in the Hot New 64 video.
Legend of the Crystal Coconut, right?
Legend of the Crystal Coconut. So I rented that. And, I was like, man, this is silly, but it's kind of fun. The music is horrible. I think even then it was like, okay, well, this is kind of so bad it's good, but it's enjoyable. And, like, that sort of reignited my interest in Donkey Kong. I don't want to say it reignited it, because actually you reignited it, but that
you hear that, Nintendo? You hear it?
Yeah.
You hear it?
So I think later that night after watching it, I was surfing the information superhighway on my Dreamcast web browser, and that's when I came across DKVine.com.
Right.
And I started just binging your features and your archives and your accounts, and like your news sections, and just like, it was about a year old at that point, getting close to it anyway, but your enthusiasm for DK64 and like just all of the things, not just DK64 to be fair, like the things that you are so enthusiastic and so passionate and so interested in to this day, all of that was absolutely infectious. And like, I remember, like taking out my old Super NES and hooking it up for like the first time in, it seemed to be back then like in a long time. I don't know how long it had actually been, but just like, it was kind of one of the first times that I really went back and sort of reanalyzed these games from my earlier childhood and like took the time to appreciate them on like a different, like, I guess more mature level. Cause there's a big difference between playing DKC2 when you're like 7 or 8 years old versus playing it, even when you're like 12 or 13 years old.
Sure. Yeah.
And, so yeah, essentially, like, for as much, and of course we're slagging off on the DKC television series, and with good reason, to be fair. I never blamed you for it. But like, that freaking Legend of the Crystal Coconut VHS tape is essentially the reason that I'm here doing this show now.
I don't know how to feel about that.
Yeah.
I'll take it. Look, I've also made my peace, not personally, but I've made my peace with the cartoon and how it's brought people into the fandom. So, I'm not gonna ever do why the Donkey Kong Country cartoon show matters. That's never gonna be an episode of the Kongversation. But I will tolerate its presence, and I will be glad for the fans it brings in.
But I think that was just, I think you and I have ended up sort of appreciating sometimes very different aspects of game design and like what we want out of a game and what we appreciate about them. And I think that Donkey Kong Country and many of Rare's games like sort of hit both sides of that. But I think that's also just why I was always so drawn to DK Vine, is because you would talk, you guys would write so passionately and with so much love and so much reverence for these things that I also had reverence for, and you would sort of give me despite the fact that we both loved them, this very different perspective on them that I hadn't come to on my own, and that definitely shaped like how I appreciate and think about games to this day.
And that's why when I found your channel, The Geek Critique, I was like, wow, I love the shit out of this. Finally, this is a YouTuber who doesn't annoy me. Something about him I just really admire. And it was just because you were emulating me. So thank you.
There you go.
No, yeah, it's funny that this is just turning into, hey, remember where we were in 1999, but or early 2000, but yeah, I mean, it is essential, I think, to establish our relationship with the game, because there's not been a Donkey Kong game that I've been so back and forth with. Like Jungle Beat, I hated it at first, then I played it and I fell in love. And then having like Donkey Kong Country Returns to kind of like soothe those wounds. And then of course, like the whole reveal that interview was, fraudulently translated, that IGN ran back in the day. Like having that revelation this year was like the skin graft on that wound. And it's just like, oh, okay. Yeah. But like Jungle Beat, there's only been like this steady arc upwards in like me respecting it, right? Like I've never like backtracked on that. With Donkey Kong 64, it's just like greatest thing ever, greatest game ever. Fuck you, Ocarina of Time. You look like a joke now. Donkey Kong 64. And then it's just like, oh God, I said that? I said those things? No, Donkey Kong 64. That's worse than E.T. For the Atari. Yeah, like, I'm ashamed of it. Don't worry. Yeah, it's a blight on my soul, Donkey Kong 64. And now I'm just like, wait a second. So, it's just like this constant back and forth. And I think so much of it is where I was in 1999. The fact that this was the first high profile game in the DK Vine era, and having to like come to terms with me becoming an adult, and like all of this weird, like interpersonal drama of my life is wrapped up in this game. My public persona, my fandom. And so I kind of just want to delve into, first of all, the things that we actually do love about this game and like unabashedly admire and respect. And then we'll get into the stuff that, it are common criticisms that maybe we can glean some goodness out of, some silver linings.
Some silver banana medals.
Yes.
Exactly.
Silver banana medals. Alright, banana medals. I forgot all about banana medals, I have to say. Like, cause you think about like the totals of the collectibles in this game, and banana medals are like one of the most oft forgotten things, because like, what were the banana medals for? You got 15 and Cranky. Is that what got you Jetpack? I don't even remember. God, this game is so convoluted.
Okay, I think that if you collect all of a single Kong's bananas on a stage, you get one banana medal. Isn't that how it works?
No, you get 75 bananas. 75 out of the 100, you get the banana medal.
Yeah, okay.
And it just like, it's not like something you have to grab. It just appears, materializes on the screen, and it like twirls and it spins at you. So it's not even like a real collectible. It's just like this. It would be like the equivalent of an achievement nowadays, right?
Yes, I guess so. You got 75% of the bananas for this particular Kong on this particular stage.
And that's good enough to unlock this thing from Cranky. I don't even. God, it's okay. We're trending towards negative here. We
need to stop. Reverse course.
All right. So when I think about what I like about Donkey Kong 64, what I love, even the story is the first thing that comes to mind. The plot of the game, because a lot of people just dismiss it and they say it's just the same plot as the first Donkey Kong Country. Donkey Kong's banana horde gets stolen, and that is an aspect of it. but it's actually the minor part of it. It's actually it's just to set up the whole notion of the golden bananas, which is this game's version of Jiggies or Power Stars or whatever. But that is just kind of a contrivance of the plot to work in the actual plot, which is K. Rool is going to blow up Donkey Kong Island, and he's having some technical difficulties, but he's gonna do it. His death laser is pointed right at it, and you better be quick about it. It's kind of foreshadowing the apocalyptic nature of Majora's Mask a year later, although not quite as dire. Not quite, but it's still very much like we are facing the end of everything we know, and that's pretty fucking rad for a Donkey Kong game, because generally the when you look at the plots, it's our bananas have been stolen, or one of our friends has been kidnapped and we are sad, and this game did everything. You got bananas you stolen, you got friends kidnapped, but it also added in apocalyptic death laser. And
I especially love I love the fact that it ties in so perfectly with, you know, the always beloved ending of Donkey Kong Country 2, where of course Crocodile Isle, like the Kremling force power bursts out of Crocodile Isle and it sinks into the ocean, and K. Rool gets away, and the idea that he would then come back and, you know, do this, like threaten the Kongs with the same sort of fate, is just absolutely perfect.
Well, also the fact that he then built this mechanical version of his old island and a death laser with Snide the Weasel, but, you know, Donkey Kong Country 3 established him as a mad scientist, and so you could easily see him still in that Baron K. Roolenstein persona, like working away at all of this stuff with Snide, and then the second, like, he's established in this new mobile fortress, he puts the crown back on, and he gives Snide the boot, and, you know, the whole game, minus, like, one element, feels like the culmination of Rare's Donkey Kong, like, arc of the whole era of them developing Donkey Kong games. And I know even after the buyout, they would still develop Donkey Kong games, remakes rather, for the handheld system. So, like, Rare's tenure with Donkey Kong would actually go for roughly 8 years after this, up through Diddy Kong Racing DS, which is kind of ridiculous to think about that. Oh no, after Donkey Kong 64, Rare was still making Donkey Kong games in some capacity for around 8 years. Like, what?
Yeah.
But, yeah, that's true. And that was during the wild and woolly days of the buyout era, when we had Rare making Donkey Kong games, Payon making Donkey Kong games, Koizumi making Donkey Kong, you know, Namco making Donkey Kong, like, everybody was having a go at Donkey Kong. Oh, Mario versus Donkey Kong. I'm sorry. I am Gibbon. I know you're listening. Mario versus Donkey Kong. But Rare like wasn't done with Donkey Kong, but as far as like furthering the story, progressing it, like Donkey Kong 64 was essentially the end of the story. And I love that it like builds on all these aspects of the trilogy into this ultimate showdown with K. Rool. The only thing that would make it better, honestly, is if Dixie was there, because her absence feels like, how can you resolve the story without this major character? But what, you know, yeah,
funny
love the
how
story
it feels
for Donkey
like
Kong
Dixie
64.
should be there and not Kitty, doesn't it?
Look, as I've said, Kiddy Kong works as a character when you accept that Kiddy Kong is supposed to be a hindrance. Dixie Kong's double trouble, he is one half of that double.
And you have to play as him! Come on!
Okay, but I love Kiddy Kong, alright? I mean, okay, I like Kiddy Kong. I'm not like full on like, yeah, give me some Kiddy Kong. But, yeah, you know, I'm not gonna turn up my nose at Kiddy Kong.
We could be on this subject all day. I agree.
We could.
It's kind of remarkable that, I guess, DK64 feels like does end up feeling like such a culmination of Rare's story, considering that, at the time there was no indication that it would need to be. I mean,
right.
Like, there's a suspicious picture of a dolphin hanging up in DK's treehouse in the game.
Yeah.
Like,
oh no, the game, you wouldn't know this, Josh, because you've never finished it, but if you get 101% in the game, it ends with Cranky holding auditions for the next Donkey Kong game, and he's got the dolphin picture up for the casting. So, the implication
it's even more overt than I thought.
Yeah, Cranky is casting for Donkey Kong Dolphin, and my favorite explanation, my fanon, is that my fourth wall breaking fanon is that Cranky, being the harsh judge he is of everyone, disliked every character's audition, so he decided to only put Donkey Kong in it, and that's how we got Jungle Beat.
I like that. I like that a lot.
Yeah.
No, having never actually reached the end of it, like the way that happened was that basically I found DK Vine. I was like, oh fuck, this game is really, really, really amazing. I really missed out on something special here.
Oh no, I'm sorry.
So I got it, I believe for Christmas in 2000 actually, and I guess just being absolutely inundated with your year-old hype at that point, I was like, oh man, finally, this is great. They were right. And then conspicuously, like about a month later, I got Banjo-Tooie, and I basically never got anywhere in DK64 again.
Yeah, that's
and that is what kept me from actually finishing it. But
can you imagine if DK64 if DK64 came first? Let's say it came in 97, like I predicted at Once Upon a Time, and then Banjo-Kazooie came in 98, and then Banjo-Tooie in 2000. Would the game be viewed any differently? I think it would. I think it would be viewed much more favorably as like this stepping stone, rather than this weird anomaly in between two superior games, vastly superior games. But
I mean, I think at the time, had that hypothetical happened, I think at the time, like, it might have made people a little more distrustful of Banjo-Tooie. Like, you're telling us we have to go back to, like, one playable character or 1.5 playable characters?
Sure.
After we just had 5?
Yeah, 5 playable characters.
But I think
right?
looking back, I mean, had it come first, it would definitely be seen with a lot more affection than, like you said, as a stepping stone.
Mm-hmm.
But I also think that at this point, it might not be so different. I think that people would still look back on it as like, okay, this was like a really, really big, gigantic, important game that really did a lot of revolutionary things. But I think Banjo-Kazooie would still have been seen as like, sort of trimming the fat, so to speak.
Well, the fat, people go after the fat. The fat isn't all bad because the 5 playable Kongs, while it is excessive that there are 5 playable characters in a single player game, and they all collect the same items, just shaded differently, they are all essentially good characters. And I still complain that there's no Dixie Kong in this game. I feel like it's a disservice to this very major and successful character that the studio introduced not 4 years earlier and had given her own game 3 years earlier. And, there's a lot of crossover between the DKC3 team and the DK64 team. Well, some crossover, it's not essentially the same team as we said in the past, but there's more lineage there, I think, than there is between, DK64 and DKC2. So, but it was like the, what team was this? Was it the Ken Griffey Jr.? I don't know. Or maybe that was the DKC3 team. There's a chart of all of the rare teams, that's like several years out of date at this point, but it's been a long time since I've studied it. But anyway, maybe somebody in the live stream chat can help me out there, help the gap in my knowledge. But, the 5 characters, I would say, even Tiny Kong, who I still view as like should have been Dixie. But even Tiny Kong, they're all very well characterized. They're all extremely well conceived, animated, brimming with personality. Like, you know exactly what they're about, even without like dialogue or very seldom dialogue. Like the opening like intro that introduces all of them, it pretty much tells you everything you need to know about them, and then that's further expressed throughout the game. So
yeah, like, that is, so, you know, you're skirting close to the intro, and I'll bring it up. The best thing about Donkey Kong 64, in my opinion, is the personality it has. And the first thing you see when you turn on the game, like you said, the DK rap pops up, and just immediately you see all the Kongs standing there. They all have this very, like, they all have poses that just give you this idea of who they are, and Chunky is wearing disco garb. Like, from the moment you turn it on, DK64 starts, makes those 5 playable characters like the central focus of the game, and makes them all distinct and important.
Yeah. And the thing Rare always did so well was it never let Donkey Kong overshadow the other Kongs. Like, it's Donkey Kong 64, Donkey Kong is the first character you unlock, but Donkey Kong is not more important than Diddy or Tiny or Chunky or Lanky. They're all of equal importance in the game. And when you compare that to the modern Donkey Kong Country series, where Donkey Kong is inarguably the most important character, because he is essentially the vessel that the other characters sit on, unless you're playing multiplayer. But, you know, it's something I've always liked. It's Donkey Kong Country. It's with an emphasis on the country, not on Donkey Kong. So.
Yeah, and like, I think with the 5 playable characters, it's also important. And this is probably like something that really sort of illuminates a lot in my mind of why the game turned out the way it did, and why, you know, while looking back, I think looking back, even though it did have some backlash back when it came out, looking back, it is definitely judged far more harshly than it was even in 99. But, like, you know, oh man, it has 5 playable characters. Geez, that's way too many. What were they thinking? Like, that was so baked into the demands and expectations of 3D platformers at the time. Like, if you could put, like, as a back of the box perk, like, how many different playable characters you had. I mean, you know, you look at the game box itself and how it emphasizes that. Like, that was just
right.
That was what people wanted out of a platformer. Was that kind of variety.
Yeah, absolutely. And, you know, it was fun. It was fun to, you know, experiment with the different characters. Like, it was fun to see, like, when you unlocked one, like, oh, how is this one going to control? Like, unlocking Diddy in Jungle Japes and then getting to, like, do his cartwheel in 3D. Oh, man, that was awesome.
Yeah. And, like, they did a good job. While I will always I'll always criticize the game for how, like, I guess plotting the character movement is and how slow you actually go. But with that being said, they did a really good job, I think, of making each of those 5 characters, despite the fact that they controlled essentially very similarly, like moving them around, like, and like the way that they jumped and the way that they attacked, and just like the sort of like options available to each of them all felt very different, and you know, that you know, that helped with variety. Like, I think for as much as the game deservedly gets slagged on for having, like, splitting up its collectibles the way it does, like, that does overcomplicate things, but every Kong having their own their own way of jumping, and their own way of moving, and their own movement speed, and weapons, and instruments, and movesets, and even, like, musical motifs, like, that's really cool, and that helps these, like, DK64's playable characters in no way feel like they're just copy-paste, like unimportant copy-paste versions of each other.
Yeah.
They're not skins, I guess is what I'm saying.
Right. And like if you could just collect everything with one Kong, then obviously what would happen is people would gravitate towards one character and never touch the other four. And, or, you know, once they unlock their preferred one, then they would never touch the others. So, in a way, I kind of admire the guts it took to just force people to play as all five if they want to 100% or 101% the game. And that's, I mean, it's inelegant game design, sure. And there's a lot to criticize there, but also, you know, it's not like, again, in something like Tropical Freeze, where you're just going to use Dixie as your partner Kong when you can, because Dixie is just like the easiest to control or easiest to, you know, blaze through most of the stages. And there's very few things designed where you have to use somebody else like Cranky or whatever. Mm-hmm. So like the fact that 20% of this world has to be played with a particular Kong. That's not great, but I admire it weirdly at the same time. I don't know.
So like, the way that Hot News 64 actually made it sound to me, like watching it earlier today, what they said was something to the effect of like, so each world is going to be this huge area, and only certain Kongs can access each section of each world. So I think what I kind of imagined, what I might have imagined at 11, I don't know, I'm probably I'm probably looking at it from like my bottom perspective now. But the way that sounded to me now was that, like, say Jungle Japes would be like this hub level, sort of on the scale of like Spiral Mountain. And it would have these sections branching off of it that would only be accessible to each Kong. And I think if something more like that had happened, where you had like, okay, this is DK's section of Jungle Japes, this is Lanky's section of Jungle Japes, then the game would have been a lot more, like, would have had the focus that it's so sorely missing.
Yeah, but then I think they didn't want to that would have made it a lot harder to design the worlds.
Doing that without making it seem incredibly artificial would have been difficult.
Yeah. And
although, I mean, the game's full of, like, buttons that only Donkey Kong can press because his face is on them anyway. But, you know.
Yeah. Oh, remember, only Donkey Kong can pull that lever, so...
Yeah. I guess it has that problem as it is, but, you know.
Right. Yeah, I don't know. Like, but I do love the five characters, and I think they're all memorable. They're all equally fun to play as. There's never one where it's like, oh, I have to do this as chunky. Like, that was never an issue with the game. And that could have very well been an issue with the game when you have 5 different movesets. Like, the fact that they're all relatively enjoyable, yeah, that's impressive. And I don't think it gets enough credit for that.
Albeit, we were saying earlier that, like, the DK rap is a great example of how much personality the game's going to have. But I also think it's a great example of how much of a tonal break this game is going to be from the DKC trilogy. Because you think about the sort of motifs and the feeling of that trilogy and, like, the atmospheric nature of it and, like, the depth of it. And the DK rap is none of that.
No, and the DK rap I think everybody likes nowadays as the piece of pure, like, cheese it is, but yeah, I remember even in 1999 it was just like, really? This is happening? This is happening. Apparently that was George Andreas really like, yeah, we're gonna do it. I want a rap. I want the game to start with a rap.
I thought it was hilarious, but again, an 11-year-old's going to look at that very differently. Like, I was like, man, this is stupid. This is great.
Yeah, when you compare it to the moodiness of something like Donkey Kong Country 2 or the first game, like even Donkey Kong Country 3, which was, you know, more cartoony, a little sillier. It ended with a giant egg dropping on K. Rool, but even that had its moments of like somberness, more so than let's start with a cheesy cartoon rap that it like out of place in 1999. This is something you would see like in 1991. Like, hey, we got to relate to the kids. What are we going to do? We're going to rap to. Yeah, we're going to rap about a video game because that's the way rappers talk. That kind of thing. Like, hey kids, we're going to like, something you would have to watch in school. Like, here's a rap about why you should always look both ways when you cross the street, or you know.
Oh, I always saw it as being very aware of how shit it was. It was, you know.
I think definitely like Grant Kirkhope definitely like put that in the song. Like you can feel it's not like Hot New 64 where it's just you're not sure. Like no, they knew. Like at this point they were just like, fuck it, all right, but we're gonna make it purposely shit just a bit. But I mean, the fact that they got the line "one hell of a guy" in there, like, and somehow like Nintendo it got past them, or they just like shrugged and allowed it. It's still staggering to me. Even post Conker's Bad Fur Day, it just doesn't seem like that's it seems like a weird anomaly in Nintendo.
In an E-rated game, yeah.
Yeah. Like, I mean, it's such a nothing line, but I...
You know, being 11, I was like, oh my god, they said the word. They said the HE double hockey sticks word. How did they get that in there? I don't want my mom to hear this. I know this has been joked about on the conversation in the past, but it brings to mind in the original Ninja Turtles movie when Raphael screamed, "Damn!" And that was like the most shocking thing to you as a kid. You're like, whoa! Like that's the equivalent of full frontal nudity. It was just whoa. I can imagine kids at the time looking at their parents in the theater and like, oh, I'm gonna be in trouble. Am I gonna be in trouble for this?
Yeah. Are we gonna have to walk out? Like it was essentially. It felt like what if Shredder just hang dong right there? Like, yeah. But
so
yeah,
are we calling the DK rap one of the good things?
Yeah, ultimately we have to. Like it's look totally out of place with what came before. Not so much out of place with what would come after.
Yeah, no, it's perfect for DK64 for sure.
No, I'm talking about like Donkey Konga, like
oh yeah, I see
where the series went post Rare. No, the DK rap's right at home, and I mean I'm a fan of it now, like just because it is a pure piss take. It's like grinning through the shit, like yeah, this is bad. You're gonna watch this.
Donkey Konga would have been infinitely better if it had been self-aware of how horrible it was.
Right. Or it would have been better if they would have used the actual Grant Kirkhope version of the DK rap rather than the bastardized Melee version.
which removed the word hell. Exactly.
Yeah, like, come on. Like, hell was what made it cool and edgy. Come on. So
what do you expect? Melee's on a game system that has a handle. How is anybody ever going to take that seriously?
It's a toy. We'll get more into the tonal shift with the break from the Donkey Kong Country tone in the criticisms column that we'll address soon. But yeah, what else can we say that we unabashedly love about the game, though?
Well, I suppose, I feel like most of what I thought of here is sort of related to the concept of it, like how much it sort of pushes and does a good job contextualizing the personalities and the abilities and the differences between each of its characters. And related to that, sort of as this being a culmination of, Rare's time, like, sort of being being the directors of the Donkey Kong series, I feel like this game has sort of the clearest, like a clear, cohesive vision of what DK's world and what these characters are supposed to be. You guys, you've talked a lot over the years about like Diddy Kong coming across as like being like almost too cocky and self-assured after all the successes that he's had.
Yeah.
They're totally, at this point, they're very clear that DK is Cranky's son, which is nice.
Yeah. Yeah, which it's funny because you know, Greg Mails just had an interview with Game Explain where he said, no, I mean, our intention for Donkey Kong Country was that he was his grandson, but we didn't honestly think about it that much. And like, you know, you get the sense that this team did think this through quite a bit. So like there was a lot of lore thought, maybe not like completely, because there were a lot of things they didn't take into consideration. Like they didn't bother to name 75% of the characters in the game. Where like, it's funny because I was thinking a lot about Donkey Kong 64 when Yooka-Laylee and the Impossible Lair came out, because there, like, Playtonic made sure we've got to name every single enemy, every single character in the game. We need to have high resolution renders for everything. And partly like that was because they know fans like us kind of look for that, because we were weaned on that with the Donkey Kong Country games, and Donkey Kong 64 didn't do that. And it felt like, how dare you not name this stupid tomato? How dare you not name this annoying beetle that races you? So that's the first thing DK Vine did when the game came out, is we gave fanon names to literally everything we could. And those are still fanon names we use today. I mean, that's because like nobody else gave us a name for these. And I'm not just going to call it the beetle. I'm not just going to call this rabbit, the rabbit or the hare. No, we're going to call it Rodney. Why not? You know, because, and the nice thing about being around for 20 years is, while like the various fan wikis won't acknowledge that, it is shorthand that's just been around long enough. It's like Chad naming Mining Melancholy. Like, everybody just says that's the name now, even though that's not the name of that song. But
yeah, and like being ensconced in the
years.
DK Vine community since I was like 12 years old, there's still to this day occasionally times where I'm like looking up maybe I'm like reading an instruction manual, and I'm like, wait, that's not real. That's like the big thing for me is for some reason for like 15 years I thought the Chest of Time was a real thing. And then one day I'm just like looking at the manual for Super Smash Brothers, and I'm like, wait, no, that's because you presented it as being the authentic way that it was. And so I guess I was so young, I was just like, yep, that's it. That explains it. That must be what it is.
Look, I'm just saying, Smash Brothers, the series starts with Master Hand pulling things out of this chest. It's the Chest of Time. It's stupid as shit. It's like sinfully stupid. It's like, it should be an 11th commandment. Thou shall not make up bullshit fanon. But you know what? It works. It works for me. And it's kind of just like a funny in-joke at this point. Like, I don't care that, like, back then I was like, I want people to believe this because it's important to me. And now I'm just like, remember how stupid we were when we were 16? Yeah.
And then, inspired by your influence, I would go on in my own DK videos to present things like, oh man, the Tiki Tac tribe blows up the top of DK Island, destroying Gorilla Glacier, and I present that totally straight, as if this is exactly what happens and everyone knows it.
Well, Josh, that is exactly what happens, and I will go to my grave arguing that point. Yeah, you know, like, I have issues with some of the things it presents, and that ties into the tonal shift as well. But yeah, by and large, like, you look at the way this team self-assuredly did present a lot of aspects of this world, and how that would then influence the games Rare had planned had they remained with Nintendo. You look at Donkey Kong Racing or Diddy Kong Pilot in its myriad of versions, discounting the weird one that brought in Mario characters. Or you look at Coconut Crackers, and you had this like amazing distillation, excuse me, I can't talk, me no talk well, Hyle all confused, that you would have like this Donkey Kong 64 aesthetic and personality and vibe and atmosphere, but melding that with the earlier Donkey Kong Country atmosphere and presentation, and it was kind of just like this amazing best of both worlds. And you'll also bring in some Diddy Kong Racing too. And yeah, it was kind of cool to see like what they were going to spring off the back of Donkey Kong 64 with. And yeah, so like it's not like it's a complete break with what came before. I think it's easy to see that, especially because you had a change in composer. So like everything felt a little bit off, but it's not as off as
I think
we
also
sometimes give a credit for.
Sure. I think in terms of like the characters being different, like you say, you can see that the DK64 influence in like Donkey Kong Racing in it, and really, I mean, even in the GBA games, you know, the Kongs are still using like DK64 voice clips, and I think that this one thing this era of gaming did a lot of when it comes to like the franchises that existed that made the jump from 2D to 3D. One thing that this era did was sort of clarify what these characters, like more of these characters' personalities and like voices than could possibly come through on 16-bit. Like, it's so strange to think about nowadays that for years and years and years, everybody thought of Mario as having this stereotypical Brooklyn accent, you know?
Right.
And then Mario 64 comes out and changes all that.
And that's a great point, because the problems I have with Donkey Kong 64 and the way they made me like change some of the characters, I had the same problem with Super Mario 64. I was like, that's not Mario's voice. Like, now that it's iconic and recognizable and beloved, and everybody loves Charles Martinet's take on Mario, but that was an imposter in 1996. How dare you put this silly, like, stereotypical Italian voice in the throat of a Mario who sounds like Captain Lou, like, just, or Bob Hoskins. I will allow Bob Hoskins doing an American accent, but to have, like, what? What is this?
Man,
No.
Man, you were a teenager, you know?
Same
thing happened to me.
I got
How
over it.
dare you replace Ryan Drummond as Sonic with this imposter named Jason Griffith?
See, I would think that you would have been upset that Sonic wasn't Julia White.
Oh, I was always upset about that, yeah.
Okay.
Don't get me wrong, but I've gotten used to Ryan Drummond over time, you know?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, like, to have Donkey Kong, like, not sound like necessarily a gorilla, but sound like a climaxing Grant Kirkhope, took a bit of adjustment. Well, he sounds like he's having an orgasm the entire time. Or getting close near orgasm.
Well, I mean, the way that I always play DK64 is, like, whatever movement option gets me around the fastest, that's what I'll do. And in DK's case, that's, you know, holding down the Z button and pressing the B button and going into a roll. So just over and over again, the whole time I'm moving around, it's just,
Yeah, I would always do the kick. I would always do the kick, out and say,
So,
yeah.
But I think that's interesting because, like, outside of the GBA versions of the trilogy, like, that basically, especially as of Returns, those sort of depictions of the characters, you know, didn't stick, I guess. Like, Diddy does not sound like he did in Diddy Kong Racing or like he did in DK64. He makes monkey noises. And, I think we might have seen that, whether the buyout had happened or not. Like, you look at Melee, and how, Donkey Kong doesn't sound like Grant Kirkhope there either.
Yeah.
But, I think that's sort of one of the... That would have probably been the case for a while longer anyway, just because of the distance between Rare and, Nintendo's Eastern development teams. But, DK64 comes out, and not DK64, DKC returns, and I've got no problem whatsoever with the way that the Kongs are depicted there. But, like, to this day, sort of, I guess, the DK in my head sounds like a climaxing Grant Kirkhope.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And that's the way I prefer it. And, I've gotten used to the Scooby-Doo voice. Cause you can squint your ears. You can't squint your ears, cause what the fuck does that mean? But you know what I mean? Like, you can kind of say, okay, it sort of sounds like it could be the same guy. If you really like, maybe he's being a little bit more exaggerated now, but that could still kind of be a climaxing Grant Kirkhope in this game, just, climaxing very painfully. I don't, but, like, maybe like he got into bondage and S&M, and maybe he's like being whipped really hard right now. I don't know. But yeah, speaking of Grant Kirkhope,
as the geek critique, I don't know if I should indulge any further than that.
Sure. No. Indulging too much is what leads to those noises.
Exactly.
So let's talk about the music, because
sure.
The music, it's kind of been a back and forth. I remember writing into Scribes and complaining that they didn't have David Wise do the music for Donkey Kong 64. And then Lee showed Grant, this is like back in early 2000. And there's some sass involved there. Sass that I got from Grant Kirkhope. My first interaction by proxy with Grant Kirkhope. But, yeah. David Wise did not do the music for the game. Grant Kirkhope, who was the workhorse of Rare in this era, when you look at, the turnaround time, like what he was doing, he did GoldenEye, he did the Banjo games, he did Donkey Kong 64, he was, I forget, I guess, did Grant do all of GoldenEye, or did he do some of GoldenEye? Was GoldenEye like a mixture? Say again, like,
you would know better than me, so.
Okay, but my point is, like, Grant Kirkhope was just a machine during this era. So he did the music, he did the soundtrack, and there's been some debate over the years, like, Grant Kirkhope, brilliant composer, but he's got a signature sound, as does David Wise. I think out of all, like, the Rare composers, like, there's Graham Norgate, there's Eveline Fisher, but the three Rare composers everyone always brings up are Wise, Kirkhope, Beanland, right? Mm-hmm. And I think Beanland is the one who's like the chameleon. Beanland can't be pegged down to the signature sound. He's always like, he can do what you ask of him, but like, you're not gonna like peg that as that's a Beanland song. It's just like, you compare his body of work, and Beanland's still at Rare, Sea of Thieves, Everwild, but he did Conquer and Killer Instinct, and it's just like all over the place. But, Kirkhope has a sound. Wise has a sound. Wise's sound, more or less, is what's associated with Donkey Kong. Kirkhope's sound is more or less what's associated with Banjo. And to have Kirkhope then do Donkey Kong 64 roughly a year after Banjo felt wrong. And it felt like this is not Donkey Kong music. And, Diddy Kong Racing was David Wise, but David Wise music that didn't necessarily sound like David Wise music. I think that's like the most un-David Wise music that's at least like mainstream. Because now, like, you hire David Wise, you want a sound. You want a particular sound. And that was like David Wise doing something far more cartoony than he was known for. But yeah, still, you had that association.
Like, one thing there is, like, GoldenEye music certainly doesn't sound anything like Banjo-Kazooie music. But
no,
I suppose the difference there is that I seem to remember hearing interviews with Grant Kirkhope in the past where he talked about just like how important it was for, like, I guess the verisimilitude of GoldenEye 007, it needed to sound like Bond music. So I think he had something very specific in mind to sort of emulate there.
Yeah, absolutely. And, you know, like, I'm not saying like Wise or Kirkhope, they're not capable of being chameleons, musical chameleons like Bean Lint, but people do like love their particular style, the style they become known for with their signature game series. And so yeah, to have Kirkhope do Donkey Kong 64 was a bit of an adjustment because it was like, this is not the Donkey Kong music I'm familiar with. But when you look at it in isolation, it is fantastic. The soundtrack is fantastic. And, you know, there are like iconic tracks on here that I think stand very well as part of this tapestry with Wise's music or with Fisher's music. You've got and like the
big thing that comes to mind for me there. Let me see if you're like if you're thinking the same way, is just the island map screen. Like the
overworld
music. Yeah, the overworld music.
Yeah. Dun, 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 dun. Yeah, it's iconic. It is like right up there with some of Wise's compositions. And I think there's a reason like Kirkhope, when he came back to the series with Mario plus Rabbids Kingdom Battle and Donkey Kong Adventure, you know, you got some of that Donkey Kong 64 music. I think the overworld was included in there, DK Isles theme. I know like he incorporated like the boss music and like his version of the jungle theme, like Jungle Japes. But yeah, I mean, that's what everybody thinks of. But I would say like things like Gloomy Galleon, Crystal Caves, they do fit very well with what came before. And even the ones that are much more Banjo-Kazooie in tone, they're still great tracks. Even if they don't really feel like this is Donkey Kong, it's still like worthy of acknowledgement that, yeah, I mean, this is Grant Kirkhope in 1999 between Banjo-Kazooie games. They're all just as good as, like, there's been some like complaints that this is just like leftover Banjo-Kazooie music, especially when you like look at like, oh, well, Fungus Forest was supposed to be in Banjo-Kazooie, and you know, and well, I do think it's like I would guess at least that there's at least one piece of music in DK64 that I'm pretty sure was like probably meant for Banjo-Kazooie. Oh yeah. Like,
and that's, what is it? I think it's like the music involving the race car mini game. Maybe because it specifically goes like dun 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 dun. Like it's the Banjo-Kazooie theme song. So
we should just start an a cappella band, Josh.
Oh, absolutely. I was waiting for you to bring it up.
Okay. But you know, again, like when you view it as just, this is not Donkey Kong, maybe you have a point of contention, but DK Vine, when we view this as a shared universe, is it really that much of an issue? You know, and I do like really love this soundtrack. It just, you think like, well, would the tone of the game have been different had Wise been doing it? Like, let's put some of that Star Fox Adventures music into Donkey Kong 64 and see if the vibe would have been more serious and somber then. I don't think it could have been. I don't think you could have really, like, put a coat of paint over that. It would still be the same game and the same tone.
Agreed,
same slapsticky nature. So, yeah.
Like, I guess you raised a really, really excellent point there. And that's one of those things like we were talking about earlier where I don't think I ever would have made that connection myself. But like, if DK64 was like, like imagining a version of DK64 that was at least, you know, as good as that I enjoyed playing as much as anywhere near as much as I enjoyed playing Banjo-Kazooie. In that situation, the fact that the music is like so tonally is sometimes very tonally similar to it, with often, you know, it has plenty of its own distinction too. But I think that would strengthen the connection of like the shared universe of like Banjo-Kazooie and Donkey Kong Country taking place in the same universe, and I think that is a really really fascinating thing to consider.
Yeah, and you know, Stop and Swap.
Mm-hmm.
Gonna bring the ice key over into this game. The refrigerator, the Banjo-Kazooie refrigerator or freezer in Donkey Kong's treehouse.
Yeah, they could have been literally connected.
Yeah. Oh, that was the plan. We know, like,
I know.
100%. Yeah, so like that's a whole episode. We've never really done an episode that really touches on everything we know about Stop and Swap now. So, yeah, but it's just like, yeah, I like the music. I'm sorry I was so hard on it back then. That it doesn't feel fair. And of course now, like, Grant Kirkhope is such an established icon. I think David Wise was still more established. 'Cause, yeah, Grant, you look at the trajectory of Kirkhope. He started doing Donkey Kong Land 2. That was his first Rare game, Donkey Kong Land 2. And that was just him taking David Wise's music and doing it for the Game Boy. Lockjaw Saga, anyone? Come on, you want me to play it, Josh?
No, please, God,
okay,
no.
All right. But then, you know, he quickly grew in prominence. But in 1999, like, the only thing I was really familiar with him, because I didn't know, like, I didn't pay attention that he did Donkey Kong Land 2. Like, it was Banjo-Kazooie, which I loved, but, you know, it still wasn't, like, as iconic to me as the Donkey Kong stuff, because I hadn't been living with it for so long. And again, like, 5 years is an eternity at that point. So,
and I guess that's the thing. As DK64 is now, when the music reminds you of Banjo-Kazooie, it kind of just reminds me anyway, oh, I could be playing Banjo-Kazooie.
Right, yeah. And that was a little bit of a problem. But hey, look, now when I want to play Donkey Kong 64, I want to play Donkey Kong 64, and it's not like I could be playing Banjo-Kazooie. It's, no, I'm playing this.
And
what
finally,
else can we...
And I also want to say that I really appreciated, even then, and I guess especially then, the fact that the DK arcade the arcade version of Donkey Kong was in there, and like it wasn't like, this became kind of a bigger deal as time went on, that it wasn't like the emulated NES version. It was just the original arcade game, and it like. To that point, all I had ever known was DK94 on the Game Boy. So, even more so from that perspective, probably, I couldn't believe how incredibly punishing and difficult the game was. And I think...
See, everybody goes on about how hard it was, and I never found it that difficult, but I did have Donkey Kong Classics for the
that would have been
Nintendo
totally
Entertainment
different
System. And so the only thing you didn't get was the ones, like, it was lacking a stage, but I was familiar enough, I had played enough of the, like, classic Donkey Kong gameplay to really, like, be able to, like, jump into this no problem.
Like as somebody who was, like, a little too young to have had, like, my own memories of the NES period, let alone, like, the early NES games, the idea of, like, Mario falling further than his own jump height and dying because of it was just like, what in the world, you know?
Yeah. It's funny because like 3 years after people first played Super Mario 64, where Mario is doing like wall kicks and backflips, and now you expect to control Mario and he dies from just falling a little bit.
And, you know, to your earlier point about like this game being a nice culmination of the whole, like Rare's whole Donkey Kong arc to this point, it's like, for as much as Cranky Kong went on about how today's gamers wouldn't be able to handle the classics of yesteryear, for that game to actually be there and for Cranky to actually be tied to it was like really, really perfect.
Yeah. And then, having Jetpack in there too was also a really cool education, I think, for a lot of Rare fans who came on board with Donkey Kong Country or later. Because, like, especially American Rare fans who had never been exposed to that Ultimate stuff. That was pretty cool to have that game in there. And to have that, like, dual celebration of both the Nintendo legacy of Donkey Kong and just Rare legacy in general, it really shows how intertwined they were at the time. That you could have, like, this dual celebration of Nintendo and Rare in the game as, like, the most natural thing in the world. Like, oh yeah, of course, Cranky's going to be a fan of Ultimate play of the game. Sure. And... It's just kind of staggering. And I think about 3 years after this, they would divorce. It didn't seem like it was possible at that point in time because they were so they were partners, man. Nintendo and Rare, and it just how could they ever split away?
It's like you were saying earlier,
essentially
like
the same thing.
Like this is the normal way the world is supposed to be, right?
Yeah.
Like,
and, now
you can't imagine Nintendo. How would Nintendo even like operate without Rare? Like they're so entwined.
And now I was 16 when I played this. It's been 18 years since they've been together.
My God.
Yeah, right. And yet, still, part of my brain's like. That is the natural way of being Nintendo and Rare. Even though, like, I'm fine with them being on Xbox. I love my Xbox One. I love Sea of Thieves. I love Grab by the Ghoulies. Like, I've loved the majority of their output for the Xbox. So it's not like I have an issue with. I'm not one of those gamers, but still, part of my brain is like, no, Nintendo and Rare, they're still the same thing. The Xbox One is essentially a Nintendo console because Rare's on it.
Yeah, I don't take it that far, but I see where. But like as somebody who like your number one thing is Rare, I see why that would like why it would come across that way.
No, I think there are Nintendo diehards who are bad at being Nintendo diehards because they don't have an Xbox One. Because I'm like, well, yeah, but you should have followed Rare because Grab by the Ghoulies is Donkey Kong Universe. Yo, how have you not figured this out?
Yeah, and I think that's what happened when the buyout happened because, Nintendo fans stuck with the GameCube. I followed Sega. I followed Sonic Team specifically to the GameCube, and you followed Rare to the Xbox.
Yeah. Of course, I also stayed with Donkey Kong, so
sure.
Also GameCube. Yeah.
But
that's
what I'm saying. I think a lot of Nintendo, a good portion of the Nintendo fandom is only really interested in Nintendo itself and the game and the unique games that they come out with, and that's fine. I'm not like you should like what you like, but I think that is why I think that's why narratives like all the good people at Rare left were able to really take hold in the Nintendo fandom because a good portion of them just don't have the system. Or don't have interest in playing games on a system that's not Nintendo.
Well, also, I think, remember what I said earlier about creating our own narratives, our own reality to help get over disappointment? I think that was a reality people created for themselves to get over the hurt of losing Rare on Nintendo.
Yeah, to kind of say like, oh, well, it's no big deal that they're working for Microsoft now. It's fine.
Yeah, exactly.
We'll be fine.
Yeah. So
DKC wasn't that great.
Right. And that it also coincided with that cultural shift too, that kind of generational page turn. So it was just like bad timing all around. So there's no wonder we were like just the worst DK Vine in that era. I'm not proud of it, but you look at everything that was kind of stacked against our interests and our fandom at that point. Yeah, I mean, I'm amazed that like I'm as well adjusted as I am today. I'm amazed I survived that and didn't I'm not in jail right now from getting into a fist fight with IGN or something. I
dude,
don't know.
if you could survive living in LA, you could survive anything.
So let's address some of the common criticism. We discussed what we like love about the game. But let's discuss some of the criticisms and try to reassess them in the light of 20 years past.
And this part of this is actually just going to be not just sort of addressing common criticisms, but kind of addressing my own criticisms that I've made about this game in the past.
Sure.
And I guess sort of trying to come at it from a different perspective. I always loved, I remember taking like a debate class and like hanging out with like debate clubs and stuff. And like, I loved when I was assigned like taking the perspective that's against what I actually think, just because it's a good mental activity to sort of understand, like come to understand the other side of things. So I am interested to do this here. I guess the big takeaway, and I think a lot of criticism from, people who grew up with Donkey Kong Country, how they criticize DK64, especially in modern times, is that it's not a Donkey Kong Country game, right?
Yeah.
And admittedly, it's not called that. It's called Donkey Kong 64, not Donkey Kong Country 64. But I think having gone through the whole hype cycle of it at the time, having played the kiosk demos before the game came out, like the demo kiosk had, I believe, 2 levels, and it had Diddy's Minecart Ride, which is, this fairly bombastic, fast-paced thing. And then it had, I think, Chunky's boss battle against the dragon. Is that right?
Mm-hmm. Dogadon, yes.
Yeah. And that gives you that sort of paints DK64 as a very action-heavy game, which it's really not. And the big thing that I picked up on in Hot News 64 is at one point on that VHS, they say, so it's the same old DK, only in 3D.
Yeah.
And it really, really, really wasn't, as we've been discussing. So
yeah,
go ahead.
No, I mean, another case of misdirection in marketing. I mean, you see, Pokemon fans, this isn't new, okay? Like, this has been going on since I had my learner's permit. This is this is a tale as old as time, as they say, and honestly, like, I knew, because I was, like, studying the games religiously at that point, so I knew it wasn't going to be like Donkey Kong Country, but in 3D. I knew we were in for something a little bit closer to the Banjo Super Mario 64 style or structure.
And the thing is, though, and here's kind of the other side of this whole thing, to be totally fair and to be sort of, I guess, honest with myself, I never really even thought about the game that way at the time. I never, I played it and I liked it, and it never even occurred to me, okay, well, but this isn't like the Donkey Kong Country games on the Super Nintendo, because basically no game that made the leap, no platformer that made the leap from 2D to 3D came out playing the same way as it did in 2D, because it just, I guess that wasn't the style, and it wasn't thought of like it couldn't work that way. Cause like Mario, we've spent so much time, talking about how impactful and revolutionary and how special Mario 64 was when it came out. And it was nothing like Super Mario World. It wasn't tonally like Super Mario World. It didn't play like Super Mario World. It was something else. And that was like to its credit, because like that's why it was able to be such a revolutionary moment for 3D video, for like how video games should function and work and play, and how to do a 3D game in the first place. So
yeah, and you have to put yourself into the culture of the time. Even in 1999, like 2D platformers were just considered outdated, a thing of the past. Like, well, we're not going back to that. It was like the jump to 3D platformers was viewed like, I think, the same like thing as like the jump from Pong to arcade Donkey Kong, you know, or Pac-Man, I guess would be a better analogy or similar analogy. But it's, you know, 2D platformers were considered kind of like done. Like, okay, like that was just because of the technical limitations of the day. We don't have to have 2D anymore. We can run around, you know, 360. So that's what we're doing. Thing of the past. But, you know, you still get games like Yoshi's Story for the Nintendo 64 or like Mischief Makers, but I don't think they were ever like received that warmly. Like they good or mediocre to good reviews, but, you know, and they would sell decently, but it was just kind of like, oh, that's cute. But what?
Yeah, and like Mischief Makers has gone on to be quite a cult classic. But yeah, like a lot of people online, I remember at the time, were making jokes about it. Like, why is Nintendo letting this like old looking garbage on their system? This isn't what I paid $200 for. This isn't top of the line. Bleh.
Sure. And, you know, like the 2D revival came around like a decade after the Nintendo 64 launched, and then it was just like in vogue. It's like, oh shit, 2D gaming. I remember the 2D platformers. This was fun.
Yeah, it took some distance for the industry to circle around and be like, and sort of come to the realization that 2D and 3D were not like, one was not better than the other. They both offered like their own benefits, and they were good at doing different things. And
until then, the 3D platformer fell out of vogue then for a while, and you know, and platformers in general, you can make the argument, you know, but it's again, things come and go. There's a cycle to all of this, and you just kind of have to live through it all once to kind of gain that perspective. But you know, you're right. Like, I think the go-to example we always pull of what Donkey Kong 64 maybe should have been is Crash Bandicoot, because Crash Bandicoot was very much inspired by Donkey Kong Country, but it took that style and had these like nuggets, these chunks of 3D levels, not worlds, but levels, stages, more linear, more action focused, like a 2D platformer, but 3D. And we're always like, well, you know, maybe it should have been more like Crash Bandicoot, but Crash Bandicoot was an anomaly, really. When you compare all the other 3D platformers, especially 3D platformers on Nintendo, there's nothing like it. But like the expectation was it needs to be big, it needs to be expansive, and it needs to feel a certain way. And I know my expectations for Donkey Kong for the Nintendo 64 was not the same old DK, only in 3D. I wanted fucking full 3D adventure Donkey Kong. I wanted honestly something even bigger than we got. I wanted, like, I didn't want to be confined to worlds. I wanted like sandbox. Yeah, I wanted to like
an open world Donkey Kong game. Yeah.
Yeah, you know, my mind went to crazy places, but you know, that's what I expected. So I would have been let down had I, you know, got Donkey Kong 64 and it would have map screens and stages, and like I would be like, well, I feel like I'm being deprived of my 3D Donkey Kong game that I just spent 4 years anticipating. I wanted to run around Super Mario 64 as Donkey Kong. I didn't want to basically get small little slices of that. And I think ultimately the disappointment and reassessment of what Donkey Kong 64 was made us think twice about that and say, no, actually it should have been more like that. But that was only with hindsight. That was only like, had we actually gotten that, I would have been upset. So damned if you do, damned if you don't.
You know, coming off of Banjo-Kazooie, especially, like, I think to a certain extent, there would have been complaints had they not tried to top Banjo-Kazooie coming off of that. Because had DK64, like, long term, in terms of, like, how we would look back on it now, I'm sure that it may even sort of be the opposite perspective, where people would look back on DK64 and be like, man, people were way too hard on that game, you know? Like, that was actually really fun. It actually had some really cool ideas. But
Yeah, it would have been Mischief
time,
Makers. Yeah.
Exactly. But at that time, like a Crash Bandicoot style 3D platformer would have risked looking outdated or like ambitious on the N64. Like the only reason that Crash Bandicoot was the way it was because basically at that time the developers, like, they didn't think the PlayStation had the power to do like a more open world style Mario 64 style 3D platformer. And plus they also they also really wanted to push like the visuals and Crash Bandicoot in terms of its animation and its world design. Like it does look really, really, really amazing for the time. And, you know, sort of, it is easy to look at now. Like, man, imagine if they took the power of the N64 and really focused it in on these linear DKC style stages, like how that could have worked. But yeah, it like, these thoughts never occurred to me until I actually went back and found it. June 13th, 2001, when Ozzy Bin wrote a feature for DK Vine called Crash and Kong Strange Bedfellows and made these connections.
Yeah.
Like, it never would have occurred to me before that because, like, well, you know, Super Mario 64, that's a 3D platformer. This is how they work.
So, as I alluded to, I do know a bit more about the development of the game. And some of this isn't necessarily a secret. It's maybe forgotten lore because this was brought up in Scribes back in the day. So, the earlier build of Donkey Kong 64 hewed more closely to Donkey Kong Country. It was intended to be the same old DK, only in 3D. Lee Loveday even said, like, Diddy followed Donkey around in this version. Like, you had, like, an emulation of the tag team action from Donkey Kong Country. And so I won't get into, like, everything I know, but it does conceptually sound like the build they had for a while was like Donkey Kong Country and Crash Bandicoot's love child. Strange Bedfellows, okay, so they produced this baby, this product of their, the problem was, like, it's funny because you said, like, the fear was, like, PlayStation wouldn't be able to handle something like Super Mario 64 sized. Mm-hmm. Well, like, I think this version that they were building, the N64 actually couldn't handle it. For whatever reason, it was way too ambitious for, like, what the team was capable of pulling off, or for what the hardware was capable of pulling off, expansion pack or no. And so Rare essentially, I think maybe the Stampers, I don't know for sure, this is just speculation, but the Stampers stepped in and called a mulligan and said, no, this isn't working. They basically, like, made Banjo-Kazooie with Donkey Kong as a fallback option. And so the game we got wasn't actually the original intention of the team. They wanted to do something much more faithful. Mm-hmm. But then, of course, to make sure the game got out by November of 99, loads of other Rare staffers were brought in, were pinched from other teams. So people like Chris Siever and Chris Sutherland, to name a couple. You look at the credits and you look at, like, all these roles, all these, like, prominent Rare people who were just brought in, like, as, like, additional support. They were just all there as, like, a jam band to make sure this game got out, because this was going to be Nintendo's holiday game, and they didn't have any fallbacks this time. This wasn't like when Banjo-Kazooie got delayed and they had Diddy Kong Racing ready to go. Like, no, we have to get Donkey Kong out. Nintendo's counting on us. And so that's how we kind of got the game that we did. It was full of compromises. It was full of, like, well, what we wanted to do, we can't do. So we're just going to have to do with what we know works, but maybe we can make it bigger than anything before. And so all of these, like, yeah. So all of these, like, bad ideas or things that are considered, like, poor game design are a consequence of the development kind of falling apart and then having to come together as a studio to make sure it got out the door. So knowing what I know now, like, I think that I respect the team's choices a little bit more, because
for sure.
everything we've been saying Donkey Kong 64 should have been, they sort of agreed with us.
Given the way that we just set that up, like, this is what 3D platformers were conceptualized as. This is how they were supposed to be done in this era. The fact that even then they sort of wanted to make something more faithful to DKC, like, kind of speaks volumes about, I guess, how deeply they were really like thinking about this and thinking about the kind of game that they wanted to make. Because it's kind of an interesting, like, it'd be interesting to know, I guess, like, how they managed to get to that conclusion, given sort of the environment and the expectations of 3D gaming at the time.
I think it's just because, look, I mean, Project Dream became Banjo-Kazooie, and that's an interesting development too. Like, that could have, like, quote unquote fallen apart like Donkey Kong 64 did, when you look at, like, how they basically just threw up their hands, looked at Super Mario 64 and it's like, fuck it, let's make that. Like, the same thing happened with the Greg Mayles team of Dream.
And that's interesting because, the early prototype Banjo-Kazooie was similarly more linear and more platforming focused.
Yeah. So, I think they've been openly transparent about that, partly because obviously Rare Xbox, Microsoft owns Banjo-Kazooie. They don't own Donkey Kong, so they probably feel like they can't talk about the development of Donkey Kong 64. Obviously, it wouldn't come up on Rare Replay,
sure, like
Banjo did, and all of the stuff they released for Dream in the promotion for Rare Replay. But, you look at that development cycle, went through the exact same things Donkey Kong 64 did, or very similar things. The only thing is, they got through with luck and grit and determination. They made a stone cold classic out of that. That's considered a masterpiece.
But I think there's one more like sort of difference you might want to put in there, is that they also had time,
Yeah. Well, again, because that was supposed to be the big holiday release for November 97.
Exactly.
And they couldn't, like, they knew at E3 that year, this is going to happen. And there was like panic. There was sheer on like anxiety because they knew all these promises being made by Nintendo, it wasn't going to happen.
Sure.
So the fact that Rare had Diddy Kong Race, the fact that they were so fucking prolific at that point in time, just the nature of the way the studio was, and also the nature of game development for Nintendo at that time, that they had this other team who had Diddy Kong Racing ready to go, and they could plug that hole and give the Banjo-Kazooie team like an additional 7 months or so to polish that game and get it out the door.
Man, Diddy Kong Racing really was just like a holiday miracle on so many levels.
I mean, can you imagine DK Vine without Diddy Kong Racing, without Banjo-Kazooie,
exactly,
without Conker, without, Star Fox Adventures? But
that's the thing, like the whole N64 era was just lousy with game delays. It was like, we didn't call them memes yet, but it was an online in-joke at the time, like how often Nintendo was almost guaranteed to sometimes massively delay like big game releases. And I suspect it kind of came down to the whole industry sort of had a problem where when they made the jump to 3D, they assumed for some reason that development was going to be as cheap and as fast and as easy in 3D as it had been in 2D, and it wasn't.
It's kind of a small teaser of what was to come with game development in the next decade. Like, it just a small, like, here's a dollop of what you're going to get as the game industry matures and expands and becomes this billion-dollar industry on par with Hollywood,
and because game development just gets bigger and bigger and bigger and more bloated and more expensive. AAA development specifically. Again, we were like 10 years away from the indie scene really starting to blow up.
Right. But yeah, so
and the difference with DK64 though was that like the reason that I suspect they didn't get that time wasn't just that, like, Nintendo didn't really have, like, another game on that level to plug into Holiday 99. It's also that, like, Holiday 99 was inevitably going to be the sort of the last time the N64 got that level of spotlight to itself anyway, you know? At least from Nintendo specifically, because, you know, the Dreamcast had just come out and they needed something to counter that. The next year the PS2 was going to come out and, like, the next generation was really kicking off. So I think that DK64 didn't really have a whole lot of room to move down the calendar from its release date and still get, I think, the attention and the focus that Nintendo and Rare certainly thought that it deserved.
Yeah, well, and we talk about, you know, how fortunate the Dream Team was, the Banjo-Kazooie team, with, you know, being able to let their project mature, ripen on the vine, ironically, and then, you know, get that polished, like, near perfect game that was Banjo-Kazooie. And the Donkey Kong 64 team, maybe a little bit more inexperienced, maybe a little bit rougher around the edges, in over their heads, and then not having that luxury. And, like, they pulled development, you know, like, they pulled people from other development teams on to complete the project, as I said, but that also meant, like, Perfect Dark was delayed into the next year because it was all hands on deck. And I remember there was I think GamePro, maybe, or EGM, one of them was whining about that in their article about Donkey Kong 64, that we're missing out on Perfect Dark, the follow-up to GoldenEye, because of this game. Yeah. And they just kept whining about that in the article, which, you know, I would have hated back in the day. Gun-toting RetroNet.
It's funny how much of a wedge there was between these two, like, highly, like, incredibly over-the-top successful divisions of Rare that, you know, that attracted such a different fandom on the internet.
Yeah, and it's silly now because, like, Rare fandom is still a little it's still very bifurcated when you look at, like, Sea of Thieves fandom and the people who are looking forward to what Everwild is versus the people who are like, make Banjo-Kazooie, you cowards. I tweet, I'm going to quote until my dying breath. Might be my dying breath, but it's You've got that, but I think the Rare fans who have stuck with Rare, like, we're now like, oh no, yeah, Perfect Dark, you're part of the family, you know, like, we're all, like, you know, brothers and sisters in arms. And back then, it wasn't the case. Like, Rare was so big that we were having, like, feuding fandoms of Rare, which is just the silliest thing. And, like, we took such great umbrage at, like, RareNet, which was the most prolific Rare fan site of that era. And we were, like, the startup, you know, just stupid teenagers, you know, trying to, like, pretend like we knew what we were doing.
Let's be fair. I'm sure they were stupid teenagers pretending like they knew what they were doing too.
No, they'd been around for, I think they were in their 20s. They were at least college aged, but, you know, like, they were established. They were, like, the big Rare fan site. And, yeah, we were just like, but you don't like the animal games. You don't like the Donkey Kong universe. Yeah, I see where your preferences lie. So stupid now. And now, you know, we would be friendly with them. We would embrace them, be like, yeah, RareNet. But, yeah, that being said, you know.
So to digress all the way back to responding to criticisms, like, here's the criticism, here's a different way of looking at it. I think that the big criticism that you hear from like, you know, longtime DKC fans is like, you know, they said it's not like Donkey Kong Country. It's a completely different it's a completely different kind of game. It doesn't live up to the Super NES games. But here's the thing. If you were too young when you played Nintendo 64, if when you had a Nintendo 64, if you were, like, even just a few years younger than me, you wouldn't have that to compare it to. And if you don't have DKC to compare it to, then all this crap about, oh, it's tonally different, oh, the music reminds me of Banjo-Kazooie, oh, the DK rap is just too goofy and over the top. Like, you wouldn't have had the context for that. It would have been like...
Sure.
It would have been like in the same way that I couldn't have gotten to, oh man, Donkey Kong Country, this isn't arcade Donkey Kong. Where are the, like, I can't believe they disrespected the girders in the intro like that. I guess what I'm saying, like,
you're right.
One thing that I think you and I are discovering more and more as we see the industry continue to evolve and the evolution of fandoms is that time will make Cranky Kong of all of us.
I am actively avoiding becoming Cranky Kong.
Yeah.
I was Cranky Kong in my early 20s. I am Diddy and Dixie right now.
Well, maybe I should say asterisks if you let it.
If you let it, yes. You've got to be vigilant. You've got to stave off the crankyisms. It is funny because, yeah, Donkey Kong 64 came out 5 years after Donkey Kong Country. And it was the Donkey Kong game to an entire generation. When you look at those, like, big era-defining Donkey Kong games, you've got the original Donkey Kong Country, and yeah, the fandom might say Donkey Kong Country 2 is the superior game, which it is, but Donkey Kong Country 1 had the most impact. Donkey Kong 64 had the most impact. Donkey Kong Country Returns had the most impact. Mm-hmm. To the lesser extent, you can make a case for, like, the buyout era was a little, like, more, again, like, it was more of a free-for-all, but to some gamers, the Game Boy Advance versions of the Donkey Kong Country games were it. Like, they were, like, the defining Donkey Kong games, or it might have been the Bongo games. Might have even been the peg swingers. You occasionally run into people who like, oh man, Jungle Climber was, my Donkey Kong game. Like, that, they exist. So,
and I think there's a tendency with a lot of people, and this is sort of what I see, I've made a YouTube video, like, taken down DK64, explaining this was the downfall of the collectathon, something like that.
Yeah.
And, so I get a lot of comments from people who seem totally flabbergasted at the idea that anybody could possibly think of DK64 as a bad game. And I think that comes from, I think the reason that you end up with that perspective, because I see the same thing with something like Mario Kart Double Dash, where it seems so obvious to me that Double Dash is this disappointment. It failed to follow up on the instant classic that was Mario Kart 64. But to the people who grew up loving it, it's like they had a blast with it. They remember all their friends loving it. They remember it being like they unabashedly love it. And I think that DK64 sort of occupies the same place for people of a certain age, where they grew up with it and they love it and they have that nostalgia for it, and that's wonderful. And then and I think that just shows, like, why our whole argument about, it's the same old DK only in 3D maybe doesn't hold as much water as we think it does, because they really enjoyed it. They have fond memories of it.
You're absolutely correct. What do you mean? Like, flannel and long hair, that's the natural order of things. Why are you frosting your tips? What are you doing? You really are, like, married to the way things were at that, like, really, like, formative age, like when you're a little bit older as a child, but you're not quite a teenager. I feel like that is, or maybe a little bit younger, but that is, like, maybe when you're 11, that is when, like, pop culture makes sense to you, or at least pop culture that's marketed towards children makes sense to you. And
you're like old enough to sort of contextualize the world, I think.
You're old enough to contextualize the world for the first time.
Yeah. And
you're like, this is the way things are always going to be. I cannot imagine a future that's different than this. Or if it is a future, it's flying cars and everybody wearing V's, like silver metallic V's on their shirts. Like, that is the future, but that's a long ways away. And so when things inevitably change just a couple years later, you're like, no, that's not the same. That's wrong. You're wrong.
And to bring it all the way back to, like, the very beginning of the episode, like, that's something I saw with this whole Pokemon controversy. Is that, like, you know, people are so mad they're cutting Pokemon. You're not going to be able to get every Pokemon in this game that you could in the previous games. And people are very, very, very passionately, vitriolically, like, they're into it. They're arguing it. They're like, they feel it. And yeah, that's fine to a certain extent. As, of course, when they start, like, attacking the developers and threatening them, that becomes a problem. And it was just, it was so easy for me to just sit back there and be like, yeah, but, you know, when the Game Boy Advance came out, this same sort of thing kind of happened. It's okay. It'll be fine. You'll still have fun with it. It'll work itself out. But again, you know, you don't have that until you go through it.
Yeah. And, you know, and then we can try to explain this to the youths, Josh, but then we're just the old men who were lecturing and shut up, Grandpa. Okay, Boomer. You know,
Exactly.
So, you know.
You probably like Pokemon Blue. Gen 1-er.
I do. And I like, you know, hey, Missing No is a Pokemon. Fight
I
me.
absolutely agree, yes. If a Pokemon game would just make a part of its maybe post-game story content, like, some sort of an explanation or a hunt for Missing No, oh my god, I would so be there.
Absolutely, yeah. See, if I was actually like in the Pokemon fandom, if I actually ran a Pokemon fan site, you better believe that would be like the big thing I would push for, rather than
hill you would
need to
die
get a
on.
goldfish. Yeah, you need to put this goldfish in your game, Platonic. No, it would be like, hey, Game Freak, Missing No. When's it gonna happen?
So, getting away from the idea that, okay, having now sort of answered our own criticisms but it's not like Donkey Kong Country, the other criticism that can be divorced from that one is just, it's a bad, bloated example of a collectathon. You know, you can, I think, make an argument that the sheer bulk of this game may have done some damage to the public perception of the collectathon as a genre of 3D platformers. So
it did. I also think,
go ahead.
It did, but also it was, I think the culture was also shifting away from 3D platformers a little bit too. Even on like Nintendo, I think Ocarina of Time having come out a year before, it kind of, like, I'm not saying like people turned against 3D platformers immediately, because obviously they didn't. The genre was still plenty strong going into the GameCube, but I feel like there was some 3D platformer fatigue, just like there was some 2D platformer fatigue going on the Wii U and some of the backlash towards Tropical Freeze, which we're well acquainted with. I think that what
Mario 6, like, Ocarina of Time was not a platformer, but
no,
it did, much like Mario 64 it did sort of redefine the boundaries of what 3D games were thought to be capable of, or how they should be done.
Absolutely.
So,
and and I think that general fatigue of 3D platformers would have happened regardless of what Donkey Kong 64 was. I think that, you know, it affected Banjo-Tooie too, and Banjo-Tooie is a game that's generally held in well regard these days, but you definitely had that fatigue going into Banjo-Tooie. Was that Donkey Kong 64's fault? Maybe, but I also think it would have happened no matter what had preceded it.
Yeah, like in like 1996, 97, all anybody wanted to talk about was, oh my god, okay, I figured out the secret hidden code to unlock Luigi in Mario 64, because that's how obsessed people were with the idea of getting to play as multiple characters in 3D platform games. And, you know, and then you fast forward to just like 2 years after DK64 comes out, and what I'm hearing as a Sonic fan is just like, oh my god, enough with the other shit, just let us play as Sonic. Like,
and it's funny too that you say that, because then you look at Jungle Beat, which was not a 3D platformer, but you could only play as Donkey Kong. So what was that, like an overcorrection, a response to Donkey Kong 64? Probably not, but it's interesting all the same.
And I guess this is something that I've heard fans of DK64 sort of talk about with it. Like, even, like, a lot of people can look back on it, I think especially in retrospect, and sort of agree that, okay, this probably is too much, this probably is overly complicated, and they get enjoyment out of it despite that, and maybe it's in a sense because of it. And, you know, I'm sure having, like, really genuine, really deep childhood nostalgia for it would really help with that. But I think that also, if you can get, like, immersed in a game like that, if you can kind of just, you know, you're not thinking about, okay, well, now I have to walk down this hallway, oh crap, gotta go get in the barrel again and switch to Chunky, and now, okay, now I can collect the green bananas, and you know, if you can sort of, like, just sit back and let it, and get immersed in it, and you enjoy the music, and you enjoy the characters, then I can kind of see where that would be charming and kind of relaxing and enjoyable. A game just came out maybe 2 weeks ago as of this recording called Death Stranding, and it has been just incredibly, incredibly divisive for sort of some of those same reasons that, like, what you do for a good chunk of the game is just sort of travel from one place to another, and that's just, you know, it's not action. It doesn't have enough action. It doesn't have enough, like, it's not interesting enough. It's boring people. And then there are other people who are really, really loving it, and they're enjoying it, and they're getting immersed in it. And I think that if you can get, like, DK64 is not engaging or interesting enough for me to want to do that with it. But if you can get immersed in it, then I can see why all of its, like, almost limitless amount of collectibles and things to do with it, I can see why that depth would be appealing to you.
It's weirdly a lot like Banjo-Tooie in one way. I feel like it's not a game you can pick up really and just play it in chunks and, like, just pick it up. I feel like you have to really dedicate yourself to saying, I'm going to play Donkey Kong 64. And once you do, once you make that commitment, you do have a good time, or you can have a good time. But it's like, compare Banjo-Tooie with Banjo-Kazooie, where Banjo-Kazooie feels very much like you can pick it up, play a little bit, put it down, pick it up, and have just a good time. But Banjo-Tooie, if you stop playing it for a while, you're gonna forget where you were, what you're doing, what you have to do. It is very much, it requires a level of dedication that this is what I'm doing. This is the game I'm focusing on. No distractions, please. And Donkey Kong 64 is, well, the same way. It's not as, like, interconnected as Banjo-Tooie. It is a little bit more like structured, more like Banjo-Kazooie, but just the size of it and the daunting scope. Yeah, you really do have to say, now, next 57 hours of my life is Donkey Kong 64.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's a good comparison too, because, like, you know, I'm strongly in favor. Like, I vastly prefer Banjo-Kazooie. Like, Banjo-Kazooie would easily make, like, my top 10 favorite games ever, and Tooie might not make the top 100. Like, that's how much of a divide there is there for me. That being said, I can see why somebody who has, like, a little bit different preferences and a little bit different expectations, and who enjoys, I guess, different aspects of the Banjo series and of Collectathon games in general than I do, why they would absolutely love and adore and have an amazing time with Banjo-Tooie. Because, like, to a certain extent, I don't think, like, the sort of interconnectedness of Tooie has not quite been replicated. Like, I feel I'm probably wrong saying that. There's probably some exception that I'm overlooking. I guess what I'm just saying is that Tooie was an incredibly ambitious and special game.
Yeah. Right. And yeah, Donkey Kong 64 is just, again, it's a game that's built on compromises, and you know, just like you can just accept it, and it is what it is, and there's a lot to enjoy about that. And I would rather enjoy like the bits in there that are good rather than dwell on what could have been. Because it's just not healthy. And it's been 20 years. And I feel like ultimately, like, I can pick up Donkey Kong 64 and I can find things to enjoy, even if it's just like roaming around the overworld, the DK Isles, and listening to that music, and maybe swimming over to the Banana Fairy Island, and just, you know, like, not even things related to like the objectives of the game, but I can enjoy that. And, you know, I'm thankful for that. I don't know.
I'm suddenly reminded of around the time that DK64 came out, like probably within a week, coming out of the movie theater with my mom, having just seen Pokemon, the first movie, and I ask, "Oh man, that was incredible. What did you think of it?" And she's like, "Well, I see why you liked it."
I have actually given that response to several things that I've been forced to watch over the years, from various friends or, you know, whatever. And like, I was like, well, I respect what it was trying to do. I'm sure it was quite enjoyable for you and for your taste and interest. So yeah, you know, look, so I am past the point in my life where I'm going to be negative about anything. I'm always going to try to view the positives in something first before I tear into it, unless it's like something just completely atrocious.
I guess I feel a little bit like my answer to why Donkey Kong 64 still matters is sort of like, because it matters to other people. Like,
honestly, like we have a couple calls to take, so we'll like give our final like thesis statement here. But yeah, that is actually a good point. Like, it has inspired joy in like children and teenagers and young adults for 20 years now. And like, ultimately, isn't that enough? Like, it is a product. It is a piece of entertainment. And if it can do that, even if we don't necessarily agree with all the choices it made, isn't that enough? Why we say, why does it matter?
I mean, if nothing else, even selfishly, it's the reason DK Vine is here. Like, DK Vine in all likelihood would not come out looking the way that it did in 1999 had it not been for this game.
That would be the most self-aggrandizing answer to this question. Why does Donkey Kong 64 matter? Because my website exists because of it. Eat me.
Well, see, I'm not a staff member. I can say it.
All right. We've got 2 calls to take, and then we will wrap this up. Unless you want to insert an expansion pack into this episode and go another 3 hours. We got to beat Andre's record here somehow.
I think after a few hours, like, the podcast would just lock up without the expansion pack. So we better wrap it up
soon. Well, yeah, we'll find the glitch where we can just stretch through B-Locker with Lanky Kong, and we'll call it a show early. All right, first call.
All right.
Hey, Hyle and Josh, the Geek Critique Wallen. Jebaha here. Seeing that you guys are doing the 20th anniversary of Donkey Kong 64, which, I guess I would give a little bit of my, history with it. Well, it won't take too long, hopefully, but Donkey Kong 64 is tied to the first birthday that I can remember. I turned 5 in 2000, and for my birthday that year, my family, my mom and dad, got me one of I think the word is translucent green Nintendo 64s with a banana yellow cartridge of Donkey Kong 64, and that was the only game they got for me because they were poor, and that's all they could afford for me. And I nevertheless, that's like the only game I had for that system for the longest time, and I loved it, and I played it all the time, and I really appreciated it. Given that Donkey Kong Country was the first video game I ever played when I was 2 years old and sitting in my dad's lap and kind of just playing along with him, on the Super Nintendo controller. Again, I don't really have many of those memories, but that's what they told me. And knowing that I did that, knowing that Donkey Kong has been in my life for as long as it has been, just this great series, and Donkey Kong 64 for me stands as a touchstone. I'm actually going to be, I got off work. I'm going to be taking a shower here in a minute and probably booting up some DK64 and just playing some and, just having a nice nostalgic good time. Well, it was nice to ramble for a little bit. I'm looking forward to hearing the episode. I'll be at work, so I probably will miss the live stream, unfortunately, but I will still be able to hear it after it's over with, and who knows, maybe I'll try to listen to it at work and not get caught. All right. See you guys later. Have a good stream.
Well, thank you, Jebaha, and I hope you have not been fired at this point. Yeah, this is a great point. This actually speaks to what we were just talking about. This was a birthday present. Like, he got the N64 with Donkey Kong 64, that translucent jungle green N64 that so many people got. I did not ever get that, but that was like, I remember my cousin, she got an N64, that N64 with Donkey Kong 64. Like, this was the introduction of the N64 for so many people, because a lot of people who are more like, who were younger or their parents like refused to get them a system at launch, they wait a couple years. This was the point that they got the N64. And so yeah, the Donkey Kong 64 was that game.
Like, I think it was discounted to like maybe about $79 around this time. Like around holiday 99.
The console was $79?
Yeah, I believe so. I remember
the price of a game.
No, I know, but what I'm basing that on is I remember like around the time I got into wrestling, actually, which would have been about 98, the PlayStation and the N64 dropped to $99 around that time, it seems like. I just have this really specific flashbulb memory of commercials around that time. Now, maybe with a pack-in game it would have been more, but yeah. Either way.
Yeah. Well, anyway, yeah, but yeah, that jungle green N64, man, that, like, it was everywhere. And, yeah, like, we say, like, the weirdest thing for me as I've, like, aged was, like, that generation of Donkey Kong 64 kids kind of, like, taking over, and then all of a sudden, like, my content on DK Vine, a lot of times when I run Donkey Kong 64 content, that gets more traction than Donkey Kong Country content. And that was, like, sobering for me when I, like, was seeing, like, the metrics. I was like, what? Why? Like, that doesn't seem right. Let me crunch these numbers again. And then Crunch shows up and he's like, I'm from Diddy Kong Racing. And I'm like, fuck you, Crunch, get out of here. And then, yeah, so.
No, like,
yeah, my point is, like, that was my first realization that, hey, you know what? Time moves forward and not everybody has the same life experiences that I've had.
And look, man, like, imagining if you were gonna be a 5-year-old and you could only have one Nintendo 64 game, DK64 is basically the optimal pick. Like, you are never gonna be done with that. You are gonna be a completely different person by the time you get anywhere near being finished with that game as a 5-year-old. It must have seemed absolutely limitless.
It's like putting a hamster in a maze, just like, all right, let's see how long this occupies your time. But thank you for the call, Jebaha.
Yeah, and I also want to thank the caller for acknowledging my great deal of experience as a recommender and analyzer of Greek fraternities. You don't want to join a superannuated fraternity in college. It's going to be really embarrassing for you, and I can help you out with that.
I feel like had your life gone differently, Josh, the Greek critique would be the most obnoxious YouTube channel.
Man, but people say it that way all the time.
Really? Okay.
Yeah. Like, I'm like, oh yeah, I have this YouTube channel called The Geek Critique. Like, the Greek.
The Greek critique.
Yeah.
that is a tongue twister, actually. The Greek critique. The Greek critique. The Greek critique.
Hi there. So I'm really excited you guys are covering DK64 again. Your earlier episodes about maybe a few years ago, gosh, probably the 15th anniversary, some of my favorites. So I'm really excited you guys are talking about the game again with, a new set of eyes after, in like a post-ukulele world. I'm excited the Geek Critique is there. I'm a big fan of your work, sir. Anyway, my question is, I'm curious how you guys think the game would play and like how your overall enjoyment of it would be if there was only one color of collectible. So let's say there's yellow bananas only, yellow banana coins only throughout the game, yellow bunches, so you get the idea. You can collect them with any Kong, but you can still choose to play as different Kongs, and the character specific challenges exist, like the barrels, for certain character mini games, you can only go in certain doors with, certain guns with the ammo. Things like that, but you can pick up collectibles at any time. That way you're not running past collectibles that you're going to have to come back for. I think that would kind of help the game, but still kind of allow for some more variety. So I'm just wondering what you guys think about that. Trying not to run out of time here, but I think you get the idea. So thanks very much if you use this. You guys keep up the great work. Big fan, and have an awesome day.
Thank you for the call. You did not give us your name, so apologies. I'm just going to call you the unknown caller.
Well, thank you, too, for the kind words.
Yes, and we kind of touched upon this earlier, but I dismissed this because I was like, it's actually good because you get to play you have to play as every single character. But the way he frames it as, now you still have the character specific challenges and objectives. It's just bananas, banana coins, maybe blueprints. They would all be same color. You could pick it up with any character. What do you think?
Okay, well, I think DK64 as it is now would probably be a little more manageable and a little bit better if that was the case. But I think in sort of like a hypothetical ideal version of this game's design, still taking it as a collectathon. The thing is, and this is something I noticed in like when I made my episode about it, is that at one point there was this tunnel with green bananas in it, like splitting off from the main part of Jungle Japes. So I went up into the DK barrel, I switched to Chunky Kong, and I ran down that tunnel. And at the end of it was a door that could only be opened by Tiny. Like I think the individual colors of bananas could have been used to like signal, okay, in this direction is something that Chunky will need to do.
Yeah.
So which would actually have been very similar to how the Donkey Kong Country series would use them to sort of tease.
Yes.
Okay, there's bonus stages down here. There's something you need to look at over here. I still think to this day, I know I said it in my episode 4 years ago, and I still think now, the sort of quickest, not entirely a fix, but the thing that would really make DK64 a lot more manageable is just the ability to switch Kongs without having to go back to the DK barrel.
Yeah. I can understand, like, I feel like the tag barrel is maybe a relic of like wanting to emulate Donkey Kong Country as best we can. So we can't have like DK barrels, but what would be like the equivalent of like the way the Kongs tagged out in that game? Well, what if we combine them and had a tag barrel? Okay. But you're right, like that you definitely had that inelegant game design in Donkey Kong 64. Like, there's no getting around that. Mm-hmm. It's pretty rough in some areas. It's unintuitive. It's just clunky. Like, it's purposely, like, designed to make you backtrack as much as possible, back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. And as much as I like soaking in a game environment and taking my sweet time, Donkey Kong 64 is not a game I have any desire to replay because of that.
Like, it's too much even for you. Like, that's...
like
and you
the first
love
time
this
around,
series and these
sure.
characters like no other, so.
First time around, sure, absolutely, but it's like, okay, I did that. I never really want to do that again. It's like getting my wisdom teeth out, you know? if my wisdom teeth came back, I would be like, no, I already did this. Like, just fuck it. They're in there. I think that, like, it's funny because you mentioned Ukulele, and Ukulele is a game that got a lot of criticism when it came out, but I said it then and I maintain it now. Ukulele is a much better game than Donkey Kong 64. For any like faults that it might have, it is a lot more elegant in its design than Donkey Kong 64, because I feel like Donkey Kong 64 at times actively tries to punish you and calls, and like it's padding. It is padded. It has bad game design to make it seem like it's a much bigger game than it is. Now, that's not to say like it's not enjoyable. Like we've been saying, it's enjoyable in a lot of spots, but that is its biggest hurdle. That is its biggest problem. That is its biggest flaw, is that right there. So yeah, it would have made the game better, but I think it's a shame they didn't go that route, but it does give us the great joke I like to go to time and again of like, oh, you know, that's the wrong color banana. I can't grab that. You know, like, oh no, sorry, that's a pink banana or purple banana, and I can only touch blue bananas. Like jokes. I got some. Donkey Kong 64 is great for that. Look at what it's provided the community. It's provided us all these memes and jokes and in-jokes and
Lanky Kong, not just the community. Like it gave the internet Lanky Kong.
Lanky Kong, yeah, Lanky Kong. Weirdly, like Tiny Kong is the Kong that has had the most endurance coming out of Donkey Kong 64, and like even like Tiny Kong is this great aspect of continuity in the Donkey Kong series, like the passage of linear time. Tiny Kong became a teenager, and a lot of Donkey Kong fans hate that. I love it. I'm like, yeah, because Tiny Kong was introduced in the game that killed off Wrinkly Kong. So I like that she hit puberty and became taller than her big sister. Like, give me some of that ridiculous shit. Like, yeah, let's ruin these characters, baby.
I like the concept. The design is just unnerving to me.
You know what? Let's make them sexier. The main character, Donkey Kong himself, has a glorious ass, Josh. I want to kiss that ass. I want to grab it and go bonk, bonk, bonk. Like, let's just over-sexualize all of them. Okay. I want Swanky Kong to have a 16-inch penis.
We said earlier Donkey Konga would have been better had it been more self-aware of how shit it was. As a part of that, I propose that instead of DK bongos, we have DK ass cheeks.
Yeah, but other characters have to play them. He just lies there, and we've got Funky Kong going like, yeah, man, yeah. Look, we may not have solved Donkey Kong 64's problem, so we just figured out how to make Donkey Kong a stone cold classic right there. All right, final thoughts, Josh. I know this one has been going as long as Donkey Kong 64. But this is always the case when you're on. We just don't shut up. Like,
by this point, we would almost be done with Angry Aztec. Think about it.
We're both long-winded people when we get us together on the same production. Oh my god. Donkey Kong 64, it misses the mark when compared to other Donkey Kong games. And I'm saying like the original 3 country games, even the land games, arguably, Donkey Kong Jungle Beat, the retro games, like it doesn't hold up to all of those, but it's, okay, honestly, compared to its 3D platforming contemporaries, yet it misses the mark there too, because, Banjo-Kazooie, Banjo-Tooie, Spyro even, I don't know.
Okay, but
I've never really played the Gex games.
But to be fair to it, I think, and here I come with my Sonic fandom again,
Yes.
I think to a degree, Donkey Kong 64 might miss the mark in sort of the same way that Sonic Adventure misses the mark. I mean, they both have tons of playable characters, for one thing. Probably too many, and that's a part of their problem. But I think, like a lot of games of this era, that sort of ambition that made it so impressive and made it stand out in 1999 also meant it was a double-edged sword, because, like, at the time you could say, oh man, it has so many characters, it has so much stuff, it's such a bulky game, there's a lot to do here. But that ambition has meant that it aged horribly. And even just a few years later, trying to go back to it, like, that was incredibly, incredibly obvious.
Yeah. But I'm glad you brought up Sonic, because I was about to bring up Sonic. So, I said, compared to Donkey Kong games, compared to other 3D platformers, yeah, it misses the mark. But as far as, like, quote unquote bad games of a series go, I would argue that the Donkey Kong fandom is extremely fortunate that our so-called bad game is this good. Okay? So, this is a perspective I gained from you, from your videos, specifically the video on Sonic 06. So, and this isn't me rubbing salt in your wounds right now. No. It's me thanking you. So, the thing about Donkey Kong 64 is, yeah, it's got design flaws. But you know what? It's playable. It's not broken. It's, when I play it, I feel like I am playing a more or less polished game. There is quality. There are moments of thrilling fun. And there are things that I appreciate and hold as some of my favorite moments in the series, honestly, like the entire story, and that it fucking killed off Wrinkly Kong. Just, like that, when I think about what I love about the Donkey Kong series, elements from Donkey Kong 64 always pop up in, like, the tippy tops of the list. So, like, my analogy would be, like, when I look at, like, overly whiny fan bases in 2019, I think about Star Wars. And I consider myself a Star Wars fan, but I think a good comparison for Donkey Kong 64 would be The Last Jedi of Star Wars. So, The Last Jedi, it's a little tone deaf about its presentation, and it misreads what the audience maybe wanted, but, damn it, I think I like it. Sonic 06 would be Attack of the Clones, by the way, Josh.
Attack of the Clones is way better than Sonic 06. I can't get on board with that.
Oh my god. No, but, like, you've seen your video about Sonic 06, which I highly recommend everybody go watch immediately when you're done with this podcast, is that, like, I never realized, like, I heard criticisms about that game, but I always thought it was just fans being whiny and entitled, and this isn't what I wanted. And then I watched your video, and you pointed out all of the flaws, all of the things that make it broken. And I thought, all these years I've been so hard on Donkey Kong 64, perhaps to just overcorrect my earlier exuberant praise for Donkey Kong 64. But, wow, we could have had it way worse. And the fact that we've never been in that situation as Donkey Kong fans, or as Rare fans, well, my god, like, how lucky are we?
Yeah, dude, the thing about DK64 is, yeah, maybe you can say in retrospect that it was sort of the catalyst that maybe burnt people out on collectathons for a while. But it didn't damage Donkey Kong. It didn't. I don't think it was the reason that, like, some part of I don't think it was even remotely the reason that, like a big part of the Nintendo fandom turned on the Donkey Kong Country games in the early to mid 2000s. And that's the thing about Sonic 06, is that it wasn't just bad, and it wasn't just broken, and it wasn't just an absolute mess of a game. It's that, like, its infamy and how inescapable it was, and how people, like, way beyond the fandom would know Sonic because they would know and see how bad this game was. Like, that did, perhaps to this day, like, irrevocable damage to the reputation of the Sonic series. And DK64 might be a bit of a disappointing game, but it ain't that.
No, it's a game.
Yeah.
It's like, it's something you can pick up and you can play and you can complete without going to extraordinary self-flagellating lengths like you had to.
I mean, that's what I say in the video, is that, like, it would have been so much better if Sonic 06 was just boring.
Mm-hmm.
Which was essentially what, like, the previous year's Shadow the Hedgehog was. It's not a good game either. It ain't a good game at all. But it's most of the reason for that is that it's just kind of mediocre and boring and overthought and but yeah, DK64 was never going to be the catalyst that irrevocably damaged the reputation and legacy of the Donkey Kong Country games. Right,
like Sonic 06, you say, it's not boring. I think what I glean from it is Donkey Kong 64 is watching a very boring fireworks show, just a matter of fact dry fireworks show on the 4th of July. Some thrills, some excitement, ooh, that was good, but ultimately not very satisfying. Sonic 06 is taking a firecracker, lighting it, and sticking it in your wiener hole. It's the complete opposite, and you never want to do it. It's a bad idea. It might be exciting, but, you're going to regret it. You're going to regret every part of that.
And yet, showing the power of that childhood nostalgia, a lot of the people who played Sonic 06 when they were kids have these glowing childhood memories of sticking that firecracker up their wiener hole. And will argue to this day that they enjoy the experience.
Oh, I don't even know how the words wiener hole came out of my mouth, but, yeah, I think Donkey Kong 64, my attitude towards it shifted at some point in the last year or two. Your Sonic 06 video played a big part in it, but I think just my change of perspective towards life in general. I think I overcorrected when it came to the Wii U Virtual Console, and we were yeah, we should do a episode about Donkey Kong 64 now. Let's not wait for the 20th anniversary. Let's do a spotlight now.
Let's do it now. We'll just turn the brightness on our TVs way up. There we go.
Oh yeah, and it was playable. It was playable, but it was just terrible with the game pad. Not having that N64 controller, the game was just so clunky, and we were just hard on it. I was hard on it personally. I was hard on it because I felt like I had to atone for my zealotry towards it when it came out. And yeah, it's not one way or another. There's a solid middle ground to take with the game. And it's not the greatest, it's not the worst. And ultimately, I think it brought more good things to our series than not. And ultimately, I'm glad it's part of the legacy. So that's why Donkey Kong 64 still matters. But, that being said, that brings Josh and myself to a very interesting point and opportunity. So, we've mentioned this on the show, about the music of Donkey Kong 64 and how we both appreciate it. So, I guess I'm going to make this announcement now. In just a couple of weeks, Josh, you're returning to the Kongversation.
Indeed I am.
And we will be sitting down with the one, the only, the voice of Donkey Kong and composer of Donkey Kong 64, Mr. Grant Kirkhope will be on the Kongversation in early December. So, stay tuned for that. How's that for a money shot to end the episode? Ugh.
Yeah. This has been a File 2 production.
Que rico.